Woo! The Golden Stallion, the man of tomorrow, Savzu, the rated R radio star, here but not alone, because you know what time of the month it is. No, not that time. It is time for the Relationship Rhombus Show, and
it's also that time of the month.
Is it really? Hey, I wasn't going to go. I guess I kind of went there, but I'm so sorry. Yes. Anyway, damn Eve. That's what people used to always say, right?
You know, since this is Patreon only, I guess I can share a secret. Things were getting a little bit out of control with my my PMS symptoms, and I learned through watching an amazing webinar video from Melissa Ramos from Sexy Hormone Therapy, I think.
Okay.
You look her up. She's amazing. Who taught me how to hack PMS symptoms and all these natural ways that you can remedy that and why they happen to. She was very scientific about why it happens. She's some kind of naturopathic practitioner, but I watched the information in her video and I put it into practice. Best period ever this month.
Hell yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
You don't have to suffer. You can learn about this stuff and you can actually do really easy things to help yourself feel better. So I'm really, I just wanted to share that.
Do you have a
anyone
quick
out there?
example if you want to share? If you don't, that's fine.
Oh yeah. Oh, there's so many examples.
Well, just
okay.
a quick one. Yeah.
Well, one of the biggest things is stress, and obviously stress affects every health condition, but there's actually a thing where your adrenal glands make sex hormones, but they also make the stress hormone, which is cortisol. And in order to make cortisol, it needs your body needs to use the same building blocks that make progesterone.
Okay.
And if it needs to make a lot of cortisol because you're very stressed, it actually steals those building blocks away from the pathway where the progesterone is made. And then you end up with an imbalance in progesterone relative to estrogen, and it makes PMS symptoms worse when you don't have enough progesterone.
Nah.
So basically, stress steals the progesterone away. And it makes all your symptoms worse. And so what are types of stress? Well, there's emotional stress, but there's also chemical stress. So there's toxins that you put in your body, or even things like alcohol, or foods that are, full of pesticides, or just low quality meats and things like that. And then there's stress, from sleep is a big thing. Time shifting is very stressful on your adrenals and your body. Your body has a clock. It likes really consistent times, bedtimes and wake times. So those are big elements that go into stress. Another thing that I didn't know, I guess that I learned from that is that your liver plays a huge role in cleaning up the remnants of hormones. So clearing out estrogen. When the estrogen peaks really high around the middle of your cycle, you really need to clear out that estrogen. Otherwise you get into that imbalance between estrogen and progesterone. And in order to do that, you need basically space in your liver. And so if your liver is spending a lot of time processing alcohol or sugar, like fructose, high fructose corn syrup,
right,
or pharmaceutical drugs, or other things that your liver needs to expend energy on detoxifying, because that's what the liver does, it's not going to process estrogen very well. And caffeine is actually another thing that takes up space in the liver for processing and inhibits the processing of estrogen. So if you want to, have a better period, you really got to cut back on alcohol and maybe even caffeine as well, and look at the things that are taking up space in your liver and taking up space in your life, like saying no to things that you don't want to do is a big stress reliever and things like that. So.
Wow.
I think we all know those things on some level, but it's good to have a reminder every once in a while. But she also did give a lot of things that I didn't know. And I've been obviously having periods for more than 20 years. And I've also gone to medical school, and I've been really interested in natural medicine. And a lot of the things that she said, I didn't know. So Melissa Ramos, goddess, I really appreciated her. And she gave me some great advice that helped me.
Sounds like
feel
Joseph
better.
Smith was right. I don't know. No. Sorry,
with the whole
caffeine, alcohol, all that.
Yeah. Well, I think Joseph Smith also said eat a bunch of whole grains and gluten, and that's not good either.
Yeah. Good point. So anyway, of course, you are hearing the voice of the lovely and hyper intelligent Dr. Stephanie Murphy, the boss, who usually joins me for the Relationship Rhombus. But this time around, speaking of time shifter, we're being joined by MK Lords once again.
We're being joined by a little time shifter.
Yes.
This little alien baby time shifter over
Genderless purple alien time shifter.
MK, it's great to have you on for this because I know you always have wonderful things to say. Any on just about any subject, I think you've got something cool to say. But these subjects I think are going to be pretty wild to get into. So
I'm excited.
Yeah. So a lot of these now. Normally we take questions. Didn't get a whole ton of questions in this month, this time around. And what I'll normally do for those who are, I know there's some new patrons. Once a month, I will make a post where you can put all your questions underneath on, or you can just message them to me and say you want them to be on a Relationship Rhombus, and then I'll put them all together and we'll make it into a show. Some people recently have been sending in articles more so. They're like, well, what do you think about this? Give me your thoughts on these things. And that's going to be a lot of what this episode is, but also there's a subject that kind of came up on the most recent episode of Sovryn Tech. Just a little side comment that some people were wondering about, saying, hey, we want you to talk about this. So we're going to get into that later, and I won't spoil the surprise right now. But anyway, let's start.
Yeah, I love Relationship Rhombus. I didn't mean to distract with this talk of hormonal
Not
stuff.
at all. I think it was fascinating.
It is really
useful.
fascinating, actually. It's very interesting, and especially when it affects you personally. You tend to take an interest in it. But I also love. I just wanted to say I'm really glad to be here because I love Relationship Rhombus. Giving relationship advice on the internet, even when I, didn't maybe have the qualifications for it, who cares? It was such a fun thing. And getting into podcasting with my first podcast, which was a relationship advice podcast, changed my life in so many ways. And I've talked about that before, but it's still my favorite thing to do is give relationship advice on the internet. And I think I'm a lot better at it now, but the one thing that hasn't changed is just how much fun I have doing it. So I love these shows. Thank you for having me on.
I'm going to bring up a quick point on that. I mean, who really is qualified to talk about this?
I'm completely unqualified.
Right.
But I just have some hot takes. Yeah, right. That's what I'm bringing to the table.
MK brings the tragic comedy, right?
Yes.
But no, really, actually, the other night, all of us, if you don't mind me sharing this, we were watching Married at First Sight. Of course, this is a show that makes me want to stick a pencil in my ear.
It's a reality show where experts arrange marriages. Experts like psychologists and stuff,
quote unquote experts, which is my point. But keep going.
Arrange. Some of them are a little bit questionable, looking at people like data points. But anyway, they pick from a pool of applicants, and they in some cities where they do this, they get 50,000 people who want to be on the show.
Right.
And they pick 3 couples, so 6 individuals, and they arrange marriages. And the first time that the person meets their spouse is at their own wedding. So that's why it's called Married at First Sight, because they are being married at first sight. And then they have 8 weeks where they live together. They go on a honeymoon, they move in together, they do all the things that a regular married couple would do, except it's an arranged marriage and they didn't know each other before this. So they're also getting to know each other. And they have 8 weeks to make a decision about whether they're going to stay married at the end of the documentation process or whether they're going to get a divorce.
Yeah, it's marriage, conventional marriage in reverse in a very real way.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way to describe it. But, if you watch the show and they have these people, some people who are, I think, a little more worth listening to than others, like Dr. Pepper Schwartz. I think she actually kind of knows her stuff. She's been around for a good while.
Yeah,
she's held very unconventional views as far as relationships go, which I think is important over that time frame. But then there's other people on there that are they have no business telling anybody, and this is the thing, they're telling people, they're pointing fingers saying, no, you should be doing this. I don't understand this. You should do this, blah, blah, blah.
You're not trying hard enough.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you're getting.
And for some reason, the woman is always not trying hard enough, despite the male not trying at all. I'm just thinking of one specific couple.
Yeah,
in this
right.
whole thing, because I didn't even know about the show until Stephanie told me about it, and I don't know, I don't get into a whole lot of reality shows, but I do love the cringe factor of them sometimes.
That's exactly why I watch it. It's such a fucked up show, and it's so interesting. It's first of all, who would want to participate in something like this? A lot of the people who
fame.
Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah.
think some people
Cue
do
David
want to
Bowie.
be famous.
Yes.
That's part of it. But a lot of the participants say like, I've just decided that I don't make good decisions when it comes to partners, and so I want to put it in the hands of an expert. I think they can pick a better partner for me than I can pick for myself. And I hear that, and I'm like, oh my God, like it's really hard for me to relate to something like that. I couldn't see myself ever participating in something like an arranged marriage or even like a blind date.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever really done that. I've always chosen my own people that I wanted to date and hook up with or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that's a really important part of like individuality and freedom. And, if you don't know where to start with picking a partner, maybe like therapy or self-knowledge or personal development would be a great place to start. But putting it in someone else's hands, I don't really agree with that. I think it's not likely to work out. And the track record on the show has borne that out. There have been now 5 seasons, but we don't know like they do like a 6-month follow-up at the end of like the final decisions at the end of the 8 weeks. So it's like, did they stay together like, for the long term or for longer term? And sometimes the outcomes are different. Like sometimes at the end of the 8 weeks of the show, they'll say like, yeah, we're going to stay married, but then 6 months later they're divorced, or a year later they're divorced. So what we have long-term data on, the 4 seasons of Married at First Sight, there have been 12 couples, only 2 of them have stayed together.
Yeah, and despite like my poor choices in the past with choosing partners, I would still want to work on the development of my own, I guess, intuition in that regard to picking better partners. I wouldn't want to just delegate that responsibility to someone else. It's like, I want to be better. Like if that takes, going to therapy and like being in healthier relationships, like choosing better. It's like, that's something that you can do if you put in some effort to self-improvement.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's kind of my overall point with bringing this up, is that the people, the counselors on this show, have like, I mean, I think the advice that they give is positively ridiculous, and I mean, not that love and logic need to go hand in hand, but like it's incredibly logically inconsistent often enough. I mean, like there's real problems with what these people are saying, but they're considered to be professionals at giving relationship advice. And that's my point, is that who's really qualified? Like you can only ever really speak from your own experience, and you can only speak from your own, honestly, I really think you can only speak from your own desires, at least passionately, which is usually what people want to hear, is especially when it comes to matters of love. And
I don't even know if all of those experts are themselves married or in relationships. It's like, I'm curious.
Might not be.
Yeah, I think she just started a new one or something like that. Like she was divorced.
Pastor Calvin's married.
Yeah, Pastor Calvin's married.
Well,
and then
be a very good pastor.
there have been a few more experts that have sort of cycled on and off the show. But,
one of the most recent ones, I don't know if she's human.
Never mind whether she's married. Dr. Jessica.
I don't think she has the capacity for love. She's got the dead eyes, like
just these cold blue eyes.
The only like time you see her get excited is when the couples are really stressing out about making a decision. Like she gets this little spark in her eyes, but it's like psycho.
Yeah, which is probably just she's getting so much data from the overload of sensory lighting.
The experiment. The experiment must continue. Like,
exactly. She sometimes looks like she's in the Stanford prison, or like directing the Stanford prison experiment. Like, proceed with the experiment. You must proceed with the. You must administer the electric shock to your husband. But what was I going to say about Married at First? Oh yeah, so it's part of the reason why I'm so fascinated by it is that it is like so conventional. Like they follow so many conventions, and I don't know. I think you both sitting here in the studio with me share this feeling that I've never felt like I fit into the conventions of society. Like a lot of them just never made sense to me. Growing up, I was never really that interested in like marriage, and I definitely wasn't interested in having kids. And people keep telling me that's going to change for me, but I'm 33, and let's be honest, these eggs aren't getting any fresher. I doubt it's gonna. I really doubt it's going to change. And I guess I've always viewed a lot of social norms and conventions with a healthy degree of skepticism. And I've always liked to like think critically about whether they actually make sense or whether they make sense for me, and whether I want to actually adopt them. And if I do adopt them, it's because I decided that, yes, this does make sense. And it's a conscious decision rather than just kind of going along with what I've always seen being done. And so I think there's a lot of people on Married at First Sight who have never done much of that questioning of those conventional kind of social norms. And whether that's because this is a TV show and most people are going with the conventions in society and most people are kind of like that, they're just kind of going along to get along. Maybe that's the reason, or maybe they're just kind of trying to like make things simple by having a framework because it's already really complicated having these arranged marriages. It would be even more complicated to choose people who are kind of outside the box. But for whatever reason, everyone on the show seems really conventional. They're into gender norms, very strongly into gender norms. They are into heterosexuality. There has never been a person on the show that was out as being bisexual. All the marriages are heterosexual. And it's all, you know, monogamous. These are obviously like marriages. They're very monogamous relationships. And a lot of the conventional advice is followed. Like you see a lot of throw pillows and things on the show that say like, happy wife, happy life, and like live, laugh, love. Yeah. what I'm kidding?
Vomitous.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. And it's like, where do we even begin with like some of those statements? But there's a lot of those truisms and a lot of those cliches that come out on the show. And I like it personally because I have so much trouble relating to those truisms and cliches that I see a show like Married at First Sight and it shows to me how absurd it all is and how much it makes a mockery of all those conventionalities. And because in the end, most of them do end up getting divorced and getting their illusions shattered about these conventional kind of ways of living, you know? And I think that's actually really interesting to watch that process happen. So that's why I like the show.
Yeah, but and MK, I know you are too, but as a divorcee myself, like, I can't handle it. Like it's just, you know, it's worse than watching a train wreck. You know, it's like watching an asteroid heading for like this incredibly advanced civilization. You're just like, oh shit, this is all going to go to. I mean, even though these people are the absolute, you know, probably hell, they're not even bottom of the barrel. They're underneath the barrel. You'd have to dig them up. And I mean, it's just they're so salt of the earth and so average. Sorry, that's being a little harsh, but my point being,
a little elitist. I mean, well, I liked a few of the people,
but
I liked some of the people on the show, and some of them, like the ones that stayed, like some of the ones that stayed together, I was like, oh, I'm glad that they stayed together because it seems like this is what they want and this does work well for them. And at least on the part of like some of them, I think there was like some self-awareness that was shown, and maybe they have thought critically about a lot of these things and came to the conclusion that, yeah, this is absolutely what they want and they're kind of doing it for the right reasons. But that's rare. Yeah, like a lot of the people on there are
it's
just
so
like
tough to watch though. It's like if you're a bleach drinking survivor and you see somebody going to drink the Clorox, you're just like, no, stop. Like, trust me, this is going to kill you. Don't do it. Okay.
That's a good point. And I grew up kind of with the same skepticism towards conventional norms and things like that. And I never saw myself getting married. I mean, like as a kid, I had very unconventional interests. And like Barbie was never getting married to Ken and having kids. She was like saving the world and shit. Like it was just never in the storylines and stuff.
My Barbie was getting her head ripped off.
and then later on, Barbie was getting, actually, I guess the Ken dolls were getting set on fire. Too. Set fire to a few different dolls in my life. But despite all of that, and despite pretty actively resisting a lot of that, I did find myself married really early in my life. And we kind of went... I mean, it was slightly unconventional. We just did like the paperwork thing. We didn't really have the whole ceremony and like getting gifts and like the dress and all of that. So, I mean, in a way that kind of made the divorce easier, but it was still a stupid decision. And looking back, I would have never done it. And I was never marriage material. And it was just like, it was so weird because I was like, how did I find myself in this weird situation? I thought I had done a good job of actively resisting it for so long, and then I find myself in a weird married life, like in my early 20s when everyone else is out, like experimenting and having a good time and like whatever, like not ready to settle down. Like I've like settled down in this weird, and it became increasingly, it started very unconventional, and then it started moving in a more conventional way, and that wasn't working for me at all. So And then I got divorced. So I think you should be able to. I think divorces should be as easy to get as a Happy Meal. You should give them away in Happy Meals.
That'd be awesome. That'd be great if they gave toys, like at the end of it too. You know, like you get little Transformers or something when you get, just like is in the Happy Meals. But yeah, anyway, so in light of having that conversation about that show, I think that actually segues beautifully into our first story, which is from Medium. And again, my point that I was making, or the reason that even came up, is like, who's even really qualified to talk about this stuff? Maybe this person here isn't qualified to talk about it, but I suppose that's why we get asked, hey, what do you two think about this? You know, blah, blah, blah. And the first story is, does marriage even make sense anymore? Ooh.
Just hearing that title, yeah, that was my exact reaction, based on the title, because for me it doesn't make sense.
Right.
You know, maybe it makes sense for some people. I'm open to that. I don't think that my preferences and my conclusions fit everybody, and I realize that I'm a little bit different in a lot of ways than most people. But yeah, for me it doesn't make sense.
All of the secure things that people think marriage can give to them can be had in a relationship without signing paperwork and bringing the state into it.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Like, if people want all of the safety and security that they think marriage can provide, there are a lot of ways to do that, even in like a monogamous relationship. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the state does make it really difficult for people to gain certain rights, especially if you've been in a long-term relationship with someone. Things like, hospital visits and stuff like that, which that's ridiculous, that it's even structured that way. And marriage doesn't even necessarily protect you from a lot of that stuff anyway. But I understand why there may be some arguments for legal marriage in some sense, but I mean, as far as
inheritance and health insurance are the best reasons I can see for it.
Yes.
It makes those things easier.
Yeah,
yes.
This article is going to deconstruct some of that. I mean, a couple points on that. Like the hospital thing, I think we're to the point where you can just say that I'm their significant other.
Yeah,
whatever.
that's gotten loosened over time. Like,
very
that's
loose,
less, less of a problem now than it used to be.
Yeah, I don't think you really have to, like, I've been in those situations with varying types of relationships, and it's really never been an issue.
Especially if you're in a heterosexual relationship.
Yeah,
they are
granted,
never
I'm kind
going
of a
to question
scary-looking
that.
person, and I don't think they want to, but anyway. The other thing, too, there is an advantage, actually. In fact, I tell this story a lot. There's an advantage to not getting married. For taxes and other things. Like the opposite is also true. I knew a guy actually down in Florida who he had a ton of property around Ocala, and he was with this gal and they had 3 kids. He'd been with her for 10 years and they never got married. And the reason being is she could go into, City Hall and wherever else
and get
as
welfare.
a single mother and will not get welfare, but she could get all these, like she could say she owned all these properties and everything, and they would give her the sweetest deals in the world because they're like, oh yeah, we want to help the single mom and everything. I mean, she played it right up. And why not? The state's bullshitting you all the way. You might as well bullshit them back.
Take advantage of anything you can.
Damn right. I mean, as a woman alone, there's reason to do that. But I mean, regardless, like there are advantages as to where she was married, the state, or City Hall might not have been so favorable to the deal she was trying to make, because, well, we all know why. So,
yeah.
I mean, we understand the conventionality behind that.
Yeah, I agree. We've kind of been talking about how, a lot of the alleged benefits of marriage are not really there or aren't really benefits. I also think that, like you were saying, MK, a lot of the security that the sense of security that people feel when they're married, is an illusion of security because yes, you can get married and you can become legally bound with someone, but there is literally nothing you can do to force someone to love you forever. They could always fall out of love with you.
Yep. And
they could always cheat on you, if that's something that you're concerned about. And I think a lot of people want like something that is going to prevent that from happening. Like their biggest fear is that their partner will stop loving them.
Sure.
And that, you can take steps so that hopefully doesn't happen. And, we hope that love lasts forever. But it doesn't always last forever. And there's nothing, sometimes there's nothing you can do to prevent someone from falling out of love with you or falling in love with someone else or whatever.
Well,
yeah, you can't force it.
Right. Yeah. And I think it's a recipe for disaster from the beginning for a bunch of reasons, not even the financial ones. I think there's nothing, to me anyway, and again, that goes back to my original point, is that we can only kind of speak from our own desires and experiences, I suppose, but there's nothing more unromantic than sealing a deal with a contract, or like sealing love. Well, I shouldn't say a deal, sealing love with a contract. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Icky.
Yeah,
it's
like,
not
here,
even
sign this piece of paper to prove that you love me. Are you fucking kidding?
But that's the thing. It was never about love. At first, marriage was never about love. It's only very recently that love and marriage have even been associated together. For most of history, it was all about ownership of women and ownership of property.
Yeah.
And keeping things in families and that kind of stuff. It wasn't, ensuring like monogamy or whatever. And like the children were actually like a child of, the man that was married to the woman. It was all about that. And it wasn't about actual love. People didn't choose their own partners. In some parts of the world, arranged marriage is still incredibly common.
Sure.
Even, for... People think that, essentially child and teenage marriages don't happen in the U.S., but they actually do. It's legal in a lot of places with parental consent. And there are parents that force their children, young girls, into marriages that they are not ready for by any means.
Right.
In a lot of its religious communities and cults and stuff like that. But it does happen here, and it absolutely happens in other parts of the world way too often. And so, that just shows that it is not an institution about love. Love is a very recent introduction in marriage. And so I think it's really time to think critically about that. Can you have love separate from marriage? And to get rid of this idea that a lot of girls grow up with of like, oh, I'm going to meet my Prince Charming. We're going to get married and it's going to be the best day of my life. That is a fantasy. It's not in line with reality. I think it's really important to separate the ideas of love and marriage in your mind and get really clear on what is what, and know that you can have love without marriage, and you can have a beautiful love without marriage. And in some ways, the idea of marriage could be detrimental to certain types of love. And you can also have legal types of arrangements that make things like inheritance easier that are not romantic love. I loved this article I found a while ago. I remember we talked about it on Sex and Science Hour. There was a man in Scotland, I believe, who married his best friend, and they're both heterosexual men, but they had been best friends for essentially 30 or 40 years. One of them was dying. He was old, and he wanted to pass on his house and all of his possessions to his best friend. Neither one of them was married or had any other heirs, I guess. And he wanted to pass on his house to his best friend, but he didn't want him to have to owe this giant tax bill because he wouldn't be able to afford the tax bill, basically, unless it was, basically being passed on, unless they joint owned it to begin with. And so he married his best friend, and they actually had a wedding ceremony where they made friendship toasts and stuff like that. And so it's not like a sexual or romantic type of love. Yes, they loved each other as friends platonically, but they were totally just doing it to make the inheritance easier. And it was something they both wanted to do. And it was I love that story. I just think that was really cool.
Yeah. Yeah. And so much of the marriage industry is built on artifice. It's built around these ideas of, it's all deceitful, whether it's, the engagement ring. I mean, I'm sure you guys are familiar with the whole history of how De Beers manipulated people into loving diamonds and things like
diamonds,
that. And the engagement ring thing. Engagement rings weren't even a thing until
pre-World War II,
recently.
rings were barely a thing.
Yeah.
In America, anyway.
Women wanted more practical things that they could use, like cars and washing machines and
Damn right.
Houses and things like that. They were be more useful with things. But yeah, I mean, it is just, I think using legal marriage for strategic reasons is probably the best reason to get married. Like I always say I'm never going to get married again. I'm never going to get legally married again for love reasons, because I don't think I need a piece of paperwork to prove my love for someone, but I would for probably strategic reasons.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if I had a friend who was like an immigrant or something,
right?
And like,
yeah, you brought up the one to me, the one
like, that's
thing.
the one reason.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah,
is
that's
that
a
if
good
it's
reason
to get
to me,
somebody
too.
into a geographic area to cut through all that red tape. Fine, like that is the one self-defense argument for for marriage that absolutely makes sense to me. But otherwise. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, we can read some of the article here and see what they break down.
Yeah, let's go to the article.
Okay.
Because I remember it was really good.
Sure. So let's see. Marriage made a lot of sense once upon a time, mostly when women didn't have the same roles and rights as men and were effectively private property, a societal legacy that still influences our oddly upheld traditions of bride being, quote, walked down the aisle, end quote, and taking her husband's last name.
Oh, yeah. That was always one thing that really got me about wedding ceremonies is like your dad gives you away. It's like, okay, well, that implies that your dad owns you until he gives you to your husband. Like,
so
what
gross.
the fuck? I don't want my dad to own me. Like, my dad never treated me that way, and I don't want him to,
Yeah, even the word wife comes from terms based upon property. I mean, like the very old terms, in fact. So, sure. Reading on, women didn't have access to the workplace, so needed financial security. Men had income, but needed heirs. The exchange was simple, and during the Victorian era, we prettied it up a bit by convincing ourselves it was about love, too. We've come a long way. Women have equal rights and roles in the workforce, so they don't need financial security anymore, and while folks might still be interested in reproduction, does marriage still play a role? Please note, we aren't comparing marriage to bachelorhood or single parents, and we aren't using marriage as synonymous with monogamy. Okay. This post is about a long-term monogamous cohabitating couples. Why are we still getting married? There's a difference between what we say and why we actually do, because it is emotion-based, but the emotion isn't love. So these are the arguments that they're going to break down. There's the taxes argument that we kind of brought up, and they say usually isn't valid. People mention taxes when they're skipping out on the emotional argument and want to believe they're making a logical one. But most people don't benefit. Couples who pay more to roughly equal high-income earners, the higher and more equal their incomes, the bigger the penalty. So they're saying that if both the male, the wife and the husband are making a significant amount of money, like the tax penalty is actually higher than if they were single.
Yeah, it only makes sense to file jointly as a married couple if basically one person is like a stay-at-home parent and doesn't have any income.
Yes.
Sure.
Yes, and this would be really detrimental to maybe non-heterosexual couples who both make a large amount of money. If you kind of look at some of the breakdown in income.
Dual income, no kids.
Yeah, right.
That's like the classic for gay couples. There's a lot of like really wealthy gay men like in relationships with each other because no dual income, no kids.
Right, and you would get penalized more if you were married and filing jointly.
Yeah, so the next one is also to roughly equal low-income earners without children. They also would get it'd be a higher penalty. And they have numbers that break all of this down. And then the other one is most dual income couples with children. You end up paying more as far as taxes go. There's no benefit for partners who both work and earn roughly the same, regardless of whether they have kids, which is most of us. This isn't an argument against marriage because you can still file separately. The point is taxes aren't a reason to get married unless you both earn $8,000 a year and have 1+ kid, which in that case, God help you.
Oh, Jesus.
They said, yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and another thing is the debt issue, too. Taking on a spouse's debt when you get married.
Yeah.
Like, I've heard of situations where, people got married and they weren't aware that one person in the marriage had a ton of debt. Like it was either hidden from them, in some kind of sketchy way or something.
Right.
And then it's like, oh shit, like
now you're responsible for it too.
For that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the taxes argument, not a logical argument, bottom line. And most people don't know that because most people go and get their taxes done at H&R Block and don't want to know anything about taxes, which I don't blame them. I mean, because it is fucking depressing. Yeah. It is theft as well. But
that's right.
Sure, So the next one, the kids argument. Say marriage makes sense with kids, but not for the reasons we think. We say two-parent homes are better for child rearing. This doesn't, however, mean parents have to be married. And all things being equal, studies show that children fare the same whether parents are married or not. Quote, evidence indicates that school achievement and behavioral problems are similar among children living with both biological parents, regardless of marital status. End quote. The real argument for legally married parents is that one often stays home and isn't employed. Health insurance is provided by the working partner, and most employees only do so for legal spouses. So like you said, Stephanie, health insurance is a major reason to get married, but not the reason that, oh, well, if the parents aren't married, the kids are going to know that and the kids are going to grow fucked up. Like, it doesn't work that way.
Right.
Again, marriage doesn't equal love.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, that's what I was just thinking, because like, how many examples can you think of where somebody, quote unquote, stayed together for the kids? And obviously the parents hated each other.
Yeah, my parents.
Sure.
Perfect example of that.
Right.
Yeah, they were married for all of my childhood, but that meant virtually nothing because they hated each other.
Right.
And then the whole staying together for the kids, that's actually more damaging to the kids.
Exactly. Consciously or unconsciously, kids are brilliant, and they are going to pick up, like I say, consciously or unconsciously, on this unhappiness. And you are setting up the model for these kids to grow up, that marriage and that relationships are inherently unhappy things.
Yeah, and that you should just stick it out even if you're unhappy. For what reason? Because marriage?
Right. Yeah, all of which is really crazy.
For your kids who know exactly what's going on and aren't being fooled.
Yeah, like I wasn't dumb. I was like asking them to get a divorce when I was in middle school. I was like, could you guys like cut the shit?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the other thing too here is that, you know, they say two-parent homes are better for child rearing. This is a huge area that has almost no research. What about 3-parent homes? What about 4-parent homes? What about 5-parent homes?
Well, there is research on extended families.
Right, on extended families.
Yes. Each grandparent or other family member that is able to share in child rearing responsibilities does make a difference. Basically, 2 parents are better than 1 and easier than 1, but more than 2 parents is even better, because what matters most is the stability of the home. So like,
Sure.
No matter who those adults are, as long as they're stable, loving adults that are there for the child and are not going in and out of their life, but are like consistently there, it contributes to good outcomes for the kid.
Yeah, and it distributes the stress of raising kids. If I've read articles about polyamorous people raising children, and you know, there's multiple parents in the household, and they said it's a lot easier because it's not just the stress, all of that stress on 2 people or
Right.
even 1 person. It's like, oh, you have this loving environment, and there's a lot of trustworthy adults involved, and that just makes everything easier, like planning stuff out, scheduling, all of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes all the sense in the world that would be so. Like, I mean, you're literally adding in more love. How the fuck can that go wrong? You know, like, or I mean, why would that be wrong? But this is something
as long as it's stable, yeah.
Well, right, as long as
stability.
it's stable. But this is where marriage becomes a problem, because then suddenly 2 of these people have a special status or something.
Right. Well, that's
marriage,
a big problem with polygamous relationships, because only the first wife and the husband can be legally married, when, you know, they might have more wives that they're spiritually married to, but it's not the same as legal marriage, and it makes inheritance very complicated, and it makes like all these other things, getting like the other ones are technically, in the eyes of the state, single moms. And so,
well, I think that points again at the antiquatedness of the institution, you know. But anyway, do we want to go on to the next one? Next argument?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, the commitment argument. There's a lot bundled up when we use the word commitment. 1, making it public, i.e. real in everyone else's eyes. A major magazine wrote, quote, publicly declaring your love in front of friends and family in a formal ceremony and then signing a marriage license that legally seals the deal can make your twosome feel meaningful, end quote. To be more blunt, yeah, right. Quote, it's harder to leave if everyone you know identifies you as being part of a married couple, end quote.
How insecure must you be to need everyone else's validation for your relationship?
Yeah, well, I think I agree with that it is harder to leave if everyone knows you as a couple. well.
Yeah.
But that isn't necessarily a good thing.
Exactly.
You know, it's just basically it creates, you're going to leave anyway. It's just going to be a process that's fraught with shame and a lot of like, you know,
a lot of unnecessary baggage and red tape and social red tape.
Right. And like, do you really, if you've made the decision that you want to leave a relationship, do you really want your friends and family to be pressuring you to change your mind? Like, no, of course not. You want their support. And so it made it harder to leave my marriage because of that. I mean, even though we didn't have a big public ceremony, all of our friends and family knew that we were legally married. And when things started like, you know, falling apart, it was like, oh no, like we can't, like we've been together for so long and we're married, and like divorce has such a stigma to it, even whether or not you think it's a good thing or not. You know, there is that kind of social stigma to things. So, yeah, I mean, I think I stuck things out way longer than I should have just because of that whole, you know, stigma attached to divorce and that kind of social pressure of like, oh, well, marriage is, you know, this great and wonderful thing. You're supposed to be together forever and all of this stuff. So...
Yeah, well, reading on with the story, as Andrew Cherlin wrote in the New York Times, quote, marriage has become a status symbol, a highly regarded marker of a successful personal life. This transformed meaning is evident in same-sex marriage cases. They reflect in part the assumption that marriage represents not only a bundle of rights, but also a privileged position, end quote.
There is married privilege, of course.
Sure.
There's couples privilege as well. Look at the phenomenon of unicorns, like, you know, which is like when usually a heterosexual couple is looking for a hot, single, bisexual woman to join their relationship or have threesomes with them. And, you know, it is called like hunting for a unicorn because there's not many thirds that are willing to be in that position because it starts off on inherently like unequal footing, right? Like the couple is perceived as this unit and they have social status because of that. They have known each other longer. You know, they've got a position of power in comparison to the third person who's kind of like joining in. That's just one example of couple privilege. I mean, like look at, you know, MK, you and I are both queer, bisexual women, right?
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, I don't know if you've ever tried being in a gay relationship versus a heterosexual relationship, but just the way you get treated is so different. And it's like the heterosexual relationship, everyone's kind of supporting you and expecting you and views it as normal and views it as like a sign of success, like the article was saying, that you've made it in life because you have a man or whatever, a boyfriend. And, you know, when you're in a gay relationship, it's totally different. Everybody's sort of like looking for dysfunction and looking and curious about it. They're asking like who's the man and who's the woman in the relationship.
Who wears the pants?
Right. Like who wears the strap on, right? You know, like
yeah.
And you just get all these nasty comments, or you get people fetishizing it and wanting to be like to join in. You get men who won't leave you alone. And so like it's completely different. It's almost like fighting an uphill battle being in a gay relationship versus being in a heterosexual relationship where you feel really supported. And so, yeah, those are some examples of couple privilege. And then married privilege are just like a little bit stronger than that because everybody, like you said, Brian, in the article, it's a status symbol. And yeah,
I wouldn't argue that it shows success. Like I would argue the opposite. In fact, especially if you start having kids, well, they're worth a few $100,000 less, you know, over the next few years. I mean, because of how much does it cost to raise a kid? Was it $300,000 for the first 18 years or something like that?
I don't really agree with measuring success by your net worth.
Well, sure.
Either,
what is success? That's a big question to ask in itself. But
right. And it's an important question to ask because in the beginning of this section, it said like, you know, people feel validated when they get married because their friends and family are witnessing their relationship and, you know, understanding that they're a married couple. And it's like, I do think that is a false sense of security because for me, I want validation to come from the relationship itself, not from outside forces. You know, I want to feel like I'm really in a relationship because of my actions and the other and my partner's actions,
sure.
And because of how we relate to each other and the bond that we feel with each other. Like what other people think of us as is not very important as far as how I feel about the status of a relationship and how real it feels to me. It's much more important my direct interactions and dynamic with the actual partner.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the reverse of that is the devaluation of singlehood or whatever, of being a single person. You really notice this when you're a single person, everything is geared towards couples in two, like just, and usually heterosexual. It's in all of your entertainment. It's in ways events are even organized. It's in ways for
contests. You and one other can
Valentine's
win this.
Day is,
right.
I think, one of the most glaring examples. Try getting a reservation on Valentine's Day as a single person because you just want to eat off of the special Valentine's Day menu. It's like, no, fuck off. You have to buy it as a couple's package.
Right.
Or, if you're in a, polyamorous situation and there's more than just two people involved in the relationship, that makes things logistically difficult. But yeah, you're seen as broken or there's something wrong with you if you're not in a couple or if you're not in a relationship. And there's nothing wrong with being single. There's nothing wrong with wanting to do things on your own and work on your own self-improvement. And
Sure.
I think an interesting movie to watch that kind of takes this to its most extreme kind of example is a movie called The Lobster. And it's a movie.
Oh God, this is.
We
great.
need to watch this
going.
movie. Yeah, we've heard of this.
You guys, if you haven't seen this movie, it's a really good take on this whole couples privilege because the premise is it's this kind of dystopian society where you have to be coupled up with someone. And if for some reason that relationship fails, you're sent off to far away to this special hotel for single people. And you have a limited amount of time to couple up with someone, or if at the end of, I think it's like a 30-day period, if you haven't found someone in that area, that you have to have one similar trait to them and then like try to be a couple with that person. If you're not, then you're turned into an animal at the end. And you can extend your stay by going and hunting in this wooded area on the outskirts of the hotel for people who have intentionally stayed single. And I can't remember the words they use to describe the unattached people, but they're basically living in the woods and have started their own colony, but their rules are like you can't be in a couple. And these are people who are refusing to participate in the game, and so the people in the hotel have to go out into the woods and hunt these people and like shoot them with tranquilizer darts and then bring them back into the hotel so they can be forcibly coupled up. And they have like, it's such a creepy movie, and like it really plays up all of the tropes about like marriage and stuff like that. And it's somewhat humorous, but also, I mean, it's super, super, super dark.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so I guess the point, like with this whole part of it of like, is marriage still useful for this sort of thing? I mean, just ask yourself, like, should that even be a thing? Like this kind of like social reinforcement's not a strong enough word, like social enforcement.
Yeah, it has to make you question whether people are looking for validation in the wrong places, right? It seems like it's the whole idea of intrinsic motivation versus extrinsic motivation, except maybe it's intrinsic validation versus extrinsic validation. I do think it's a lot more important to look to yourself and your partner as validation for the status of your relationship. And maybe feedback from trusted friends is a good place to look as well, because hopefully your friends are on board with with your relationships and like and trust your partner and think it's a good decision and stuff. I mean, that's always a good sign, but like not your third cousin twice removed who you never see. Like that's not important what they think of your partner,
Yeah, I mean, and I've said this many times, especially on Relationship Rhombus, like one of my favorite things in a relationship is when it's like, well, if it's polyamorous, it's more than two, but two against the world. Like I almost don't want their validation. Like, because I want us to just be absolute rebels, running wild in the streets more.
Well, I still think that's a kind of external validation because it's like, it brings you closer to know that you're kind of going against everybody else. I think it's still a reaction to other people's thoughts about your relationship. But if your rebellious nature is like just who you are, I mean, I get what you're saying, that that's still kind of an externality that's affecting you. Yeah.
But, I would almost want the opposite though, myself. But again, that's my own desires. So you want to go to the next part of this one?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Getting committed.
Oh, wait, one more thing. Sorry.
Please.
MK, you were talking about being single and it not being a bad thing. I wanted to say, like, I agree that I think it's extremely healthy to be single, especially at some points in people's lives, because you need to know yourself and you need to figure out yourself before you can get into a relationship and expect to be happy, right? If you don't know who you are, you don't know what you want or need, how can you expect to be in a functional relationship? And especially if you feel that you have stuff about yourself that you need to work out or work on, like, of course, yeah, like the best choice is to be single. Like, how are you going to do that if you're in a relationship?
Right. And just another example of this weird view of single people as like broken, or like, you know, there's something wrong with them, is that whole, which I hate this ceremony, if I have to go to a wedding where they line they're like, all the single women come up and whoever catches the bouquet. I dodged that bouquet like a bullet. I'm like, fucking no, I don't want to touch it. I don't want it to touch me. Like, I just sit that part out. Like, and I've even been in places where people have been like, go on, go up there. Like, and I'm like, no, I don't want to ever be married.
Yeah.
I don't want
to play your weird game.
I don't want to play your weird game. Like, I'm fine without being married again. Like, it's totally okay. But yeah, you do see that kind of clamoring over the bouquet thing as if it's like such a necessity. And, you know, it's fine if people want to choose to do that, but I just don't think a lot of people really critically think about it and seriously question the conventions that they've grown up around.
Well, this is the thing, is a lot of these, and there's a very funny double standard here, because a lot of these conventions, a lot of these even like games, like you mentioned, that get done at weddings and everything, come from a time where society wasn't at the industrial advancement and technological advancement, and we have all the creature comforts and everything else. Like, I mean, you know, humans reproducing, one could argue, was very important at the time for the survival of the tribe or of the nation or society or whatever. You know, I'm not saying I agree with that. I'm just saying I could see where they were thinking that at the time, and that's where these games came out of. The funny thing, or go ahead.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt there.
Oh no, go ahead.
Just the gendered assumptions that are made in those games too.
Sure.
Like the problem is single women. That's
right.
The biggest thing. It's like, no, you're broken and you're messed up if you're a single woman who's vying for that bouquet. There's not a similar.
You should be wanting to catch that bouquet so you won't be single anymore, because it's bad to be single.
Because the worst thing to be is a single woman, whereas a single man is he's just working on himself. He's just trying, you know, it's totally fine for him to be a maverick and like go rogue. And
he's just enjoying being a bachelor. He can't be tied down, you know?
Right.
Yeah. So, but I mean, the hilarious thing with that is that the reason they want to continue these traditions is because if you don't, society will go back to the time that started the fucking traditions. It's like, wait a minute, like, it's the most circular logic you're ever going to hear in your life, because so these traditions started because we lived in this less advanced time, you know, where survival of everybody is so important, blah blah blah, and yet you're saying the reason we need to keep them is so that we don't go back to it, but they started because we weren't as advanced as we were, so like it doesn't, like, that doesn't compute. You know what I mean? That just doesn't make any sense, that you're arguing to keep traditions that existed from a time that you are scared that if you don't have the traditions, you're going to go back to that time that created the traditions. It's just, it's crazy. So anyway, okay, so let's go to this commitment one. Has like 4 parts to it. So we'll try and breeze through them. Number 2 is getting commitment from our partner. Major publications have printed, quote, a marriage contract puts a protective shell around your relationship that gives couples a sense of security that they'll stay together no matter what, end quote.
Oh, you mean a relationship container, Brian?
Oh, no.
Your favorite?
Fuck. I hate that term.
So, MK, you probably don't know about this, but a podcast was recommended to Brian and I about relationships, and the person who recommended it was really enthusiastic, and we started listening to it, and we caught one of the episodes that was like really laden with jargon, and the host was talking about a relationship container.
Sexy.
I know, right?
And like that, we didn't understand what he meant by that term, and it was just like a little bit
like,
weird.
Are we fireflies in a mason jar?
And he kept saying it, and it kept like getting on our nerves, because we were like, "What the fuck is he talking about?" Like, he didn't know what he meant. I think what he meant by the relationship container now was that, like, it's like kind of like the boundaries and like the rules and the established agreements that you have that support your relationship, and the relationship kind of lives inside of it. But it was like a very weird word. It kind of makes you think like, well, I don't want to be contained, right?
Yeah.
Is that like the relationship Skinner box?
Haven't heard of that one. Do this and you will get a reward.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Yeah, it's such a crazy term. And boy, there's so much I could say about that podcast. But anyway.
I mean, I thought it was like a good podcast aside from like that I didn't understand what he was talking about, but
yeah. So anyway, reading on, some argue it's the labels that are kind of this protective shell. Using the terms husband and wife often causes people to think of each other in a more permanent, you're a part of me / I'm a part of you way, end quote. Some even go so far as to say, quote, once you're hitched, you can sit back and feel content that you've reached that hope of a lifelong, satisfying, loving relationship, end quote. But guys, that's not how this works. That's not how any of this works. There's another quote there, but wow, yeah exactly.
I'm glad
not how this works.
Yeah, I'm glad the author said that because, yeah, it's not how it is. It is a myth and a fallacy that once you get married, you can just stop doing all the work because all the work has been done.
You got the reward, you know.
Right. Yeah, you may have got the reward and you've locked that person in, but you still have to work on the relationship, and relationships take maintenance and a lot of work to maintain. And, you know, you can't just go ahead and start taking each other for granted and start like letting the relationship fall apart from lack of maintenance. You know, it's like just like you have to go to the dentist or just like you have to maintain your home or else it's going to get like a shithole. You have to maintain your relationship, too.
Yeah. I definitely got that sense when I was married, too. It's like, hey, why don't we like work on these problems? And there's this kind of like underlying assumption of like, well, I already have you for like on my ex-husband's part, like, oh, well, I already have you for life, so I mean, there's nothing I can do that's going to make you leave or whatever, so I'm not going to really put in the effort. And it was incredibly frustrating because I would be like, hey, this is something we can do to make this relationship better. You know, we could go to a marriage counselor, we could go to therapy, you know, we can actually work on these things. And there was just kind of like no effort.
Why would I do
that?
Because we're already married.
We're already married, and we're just going to be married forever. And so, yeah, there was like I felt taken for granted, and that's a terrible feeling to feel like.
It is.
And why the hell would you marry somebody that would just even think about sitting back on anything? I mean, like,
right.
You know, what about personal continual improvement? I mean, even people that quote unquote have got it licked. I mean, there's always more. We're humans. It's such a dynamic condition. There's always improvement.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Brian, because I really agree that we can always do better. Like even, you know, if people tell me I'm really good at certain things, and I'll usually say like, well, thanks, but I always think I can do better. And, you know, right? I'm always thinking of ways I could do better. And relationships are like that too. Now, I don't think that the whole taking each other for granted thing only happens in marriages. Mm-hmm. Yes, in marriages there is a very strong incentive for it because it is hard to leave. You know, you have to go through this whole legal rigmarole, and that's like a giant, I guess, barrier to exit. You know, you've heard of barriers to entry, but this is a barrier to exit that's keeping you in. Kind of like those border walls, you know, they're really keeping Americans in. But yeah, like when you have a barrier to exit, it makes it harder to leave, and it creates an incentive to actually let things go and fall apart and not try as hard, because most people are, you know, like interested in doing the least amount of work possible, right? That's just rational, right? They're just being efficient. And so they want to get the most reward for the least amount of effort. And marriage is sort of like an artificial barrier that makes it harder to leave and makes it so that you don't have to do as much work to keep your partner around. And I think that's really concerning because, like, wouldn't you want, if you were in a relationship, you listeners, wouldn't you want your partner to have to continually work to impress you and to keep you around? Like, you wouldn't want someone to just kind of like slack off. And like you said, MK, it's the worst feeling in the world, being taken for granted like that and knowing that you're being taken for granted. Now, I think this happens in just long-term relationships in general, too, where people get comfortable and it can happen. It can happen. Yeah, it can happen, especially like if they're cohabitating, because cohabitating is another barrier to exit. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, it's not as strong of one as marriage, but it is a significant barrier to exit. And so I think that it can be very easy to get comfortable in cohabitating relationships. And it's something that you have to be conscious of and make sure that you're not taking your partner for granted, right? Same thing with monogamous relationships. If you're not being challenged by outside people who might want to date your partner or date you, you know, you don't have as much incentive to, you know, keep your to like work to keep your partner, basically.
Sure.
So and that's one of the things I've always really liked about non-monogamy, I guess, was that it feels like it's an insurance against being taken for granted because, yeah, you do always have to work to keep your partner. They're always going to be there consciously because they could go off with someone else if they get sick of you or if you're not pulling your weight.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to read a little more from this segment particularly. It says, as William Barry wrote in Psychology Today, why you really want to get married is, quote, this often illusionary feeling of security is enhanced by the legal binding of one to another. It makes it more difficult to leave and thereby relates to possessing. In short, we want to marry so we can hold on to another, end quote. If people were honest, they'd admit that when they talk about love in terms of forever, they're really talking about fear and actually saying, quote, I don't want to be alone, end quote.
Yeah, I think everyone struggles with feelings of abandonment, in relationships. And that can definitely be worked on through therapy. And a lot of times it comes from other places in your life too. So, I mean, yeah, I think most people do like having something that they think is completely theirs and that they can completely possess. I don't really understand that.
Sure.
That's not really the way I love people. I don't like, I don't know. I guess I'm just not wired that way. But yeah, like, wouldn't you want it to be like an ongoing, like, negotiation of needs and like you're growing together or you're improving over time instead of just staying stagnant.
Right. Like, do you want a thing or do you want a partner? Do you want a slave or do you want a partner, right? Like, most people don't like the feeling of being treated as though they're an object or a thing. They want to be treated as though they're a person. And the differences in how you treat an object versus how you treat a person, the way you treat a person, it's much more of an interaction. It's two-sided. You care about what they think. You realize what they think might be different than what you think. You talk to them. You ask them questions. You listen to their answers. With a thing, it's just you're using it for your pleasure and your pleasure only, and your needs are the only thing that matter. So it is very different, and none of us like being treated as a thing. And it can be very easy to treat your partner as more of a possession when you have that attitude, and when you're married.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, one thing to consider, I mean, I know people are afraid of feeling abandoned, but when it comes down to it, we all die alone. I mean, there's no escaping that. I don't mean to be like super bummer about it. I don't think of it as a bad thing, but you will always die alone. Right.
And that's the thing. Like, yes, we come into this world alone and we go out of it alone. And that's, I agree with you, MK, that's a really important thing to keep in perspective, that you are going to be alone at times in your life. You are going to have to face certain things alone, and you might as well be ready for it. And another thing that reminded me of that I was thinking is like, okay, you could feel as secure as you possibly can in a relationship, that your relationship is solid and it's not going anywhere, but you or your partner could always die. We don't know how long we're going to live, right? Mm-hmm. You could be a widow or a widower, right? Mm-hmm. Like, and I think like there are some people who, they would start worrying about that. Even if they felt 100% secure in the status of their relationship, they could always worry that, their partner might just unexpectedly drop dead, and...
Or, it doesn't even have to be something like where somebody just drops dead. Mm-hmm. People change, especially if they're not people that just sit back, when they think they've won the trophy. I don't like to use that term, but
you could grow apart.
Yeah. I mean, and that's okay. Like that person is just becoming what, at least either in their opinion or whatever, a better version of themselves. Mm-hmm. And if you're not a part of that, you're not a part of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, that's okay if you grow, in a different direction or something.
Yeah. Like being able to be comfortable with non-attachment to a certain degree in a healthy way, and being able to sit alone with your thoughts and really lean into those feelings in solitude, I think is really good for self-development. And a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people think they constantly need partners to, whether they need someone there with them all the time for whatever reasons. I think it's somewhat sad that like we're constantly seeking out partnerships sometimes, or we're encouraged to seek out partnerships instead of just kind of sitting, like being comfortable with being alone with your own thoughts.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, now I do want to say that I can relate and I can understand when people do get attached. I mean, I think it's a normal human thing to bond with people and to feel that sense of attachment, or like, I never want this to end, or I never want to lose this. I think it is totally normal to have those thoughts and feelings. And, it certainly is possible to practice, I guess, like non-attachment in a dysfunctional way, or like a non-healthy way, like, right. That is like you could just like not care about anyone and never bond with anyone, essentially. But the trick is to kind of find that balance of like, loving, but also providing the freedom, so that you're not like, it's like when you grip a fistful of sand and it comes out from between your fingers, right? That's the analogy that I always hear.
Grip,
yeah, the more you tighten, so you need to have like a loose grip, and you like realize that your partner can change, and that is okay, and you have a bond with them, but you're not so like clinging onto them that you're stifling them from ever being able to be free or change or grow.
Sure. So I want to read the last bit to this one, and it says in reference to not wanting to be alone, it says there's two problems with this, or not wanting to be alone, and so you want to hold them by contract. Number one, contracts can be broken, so they're a false sense of security. We don't control other people. Number two, security becomes comfort, and comfort makes us lazy. And because relationships take work, getting lazy is a huge driver for many top reasons couples divorce. Now, plenty of people argue that they know this. Of course, relationships take work. So I'll ask then, why the contract? Why don't you trust? Who don't you trust, yourself or your partner?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I'd rather leave and this is the writer saying this, I'd rather leave the door wide open for my partner than hold him legally obligated to stay. When I kiss him each morning, I want to know he's there because he wants to be, and I want to work for that.
For sure.
Yes.
Yeah, and that hits it. I mean, that again, yeah, why the contract? Like what? And we've been saying that since the beginning of this.
It shows an inherent distrust in your partner.
Right.
Really. It's saying, you can't be trusted to actually be with me. And you can't build a healthy relationship if there's distrust there.
And the funny thing is, people know this. I think people inherently know this, because you ask about a prenup. Yeah. And people say, well, don't you love me? Why should I have to sign this piece of paper? And it's like, well, wait a second. Well, then why do I have to sign that one?
Piece of paper.
Well, what's the difference between
There's not
these two
just
contracts?
one piece of paper involved. Yeah.
So, I understand what you're saying about the prenup. Yeah, that sounds like bullshit. But boy, that one does too.
I like to be with people who mean what they say, and like their word should be enough. If they're trustworthy, their words and actions will bear that out over time. I don't need them to sign a piece of paper so that I can be sure that they're trustworthy.
Right. Otherwise, why the hell are you letting them in your house and bed? Like, are you crazy?
Exactly. I mean, I like agreements as far as like getting on the same page with a partner, and both like showing your genuine, heartfelt intention to honor a commitment that you've made to each other, or something like that. But a contract is kind of the opposite of that. Like, how many contracts have you signed that you've actually read and understood the whole thing? Like everyone can think of contracts that they've signed, or like end user license agreements. Like, nobody fucking reads that stuff. And same thing with like even marriage contracts. Like, how can you keep all that in your head when it's written in legalese and it's not like a from the heart thing? It's like somebody else writes it, they put it in front of you, and you sign it without really wholeheartedly agreeing to it. You're not like, yes, you couldn't like articulate the contents of the contract because you really believe it. You're putting your name on something that somebody else wrote and saying, I guess I accept this. But in practice, it may be really difficult to call on what you actually agreed to. And because you don't really believe it, you're not really behind it. And
you're tying up a lot of other things you have in that legal contract with someone else. And it's sometimes hard to trust people, and you don't know how they will change over time. Someone can definitely dupe you into marrying them and then take half your stuff through the divorce. I mean, unfortunately, your assets get really tied up in marriage too, and that's a huge disadvantage for a lot of people.
Yeah, kind of a funny thing here. So, in fact, I don't even know if I've told you this, Stephanie, if I told you this story. So when I got married, we had to have the justice of the peace. It was a woman. That was like kind of unconventional to get married by a woman. And the reason I had to get a justice of the peace was I did not want it to say "till death do us part." I absolutely refuse. And because I have this, and people can call it irrational, I don't give a shit. I don't plan on dying, like, ever. I'll keep going. And so I said, no, don't put that in there. Like, I don't want that, and you think it's just a simple thing. Oh, you just say it, blah, blah, blah. Well, if I'm just saying it, that just shows how much bullshit all this contract is anyway. But that's the point, like, that people don't even read or think about what they're saying. And, like, I don't know, just like, even that, it just feels icky to say, oh, till death do you part.
I hate
we're not
that.
fucking dying. What the hell what is this crap? And
or like it's put such a huge amount of pressure, especially if the person ends up changing or whatever. Like, it shouldn't take a death for you to realize maybe you should get out of your marriage because it's become an unstable situation.
It's kind of macabre. I mean, to like,
I should wait for my abusive husband to die before I can leave the marriage. Like, that's bullshit.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
It's such a strange. Yeah, it's very strange. So anyway,
I guess you could interpret that different ways, like death of the trust, or like death of the person who you thought they were, or but
like
a metaphorical death, not an actual death. Right.
Let's be all constitutionalist about it, okay?
Sure.
Original intent. Let's go to John Adams. No,
there's that comma, right?
You want to go to number 3 here quick?
Sure.
All right, so 3 is giving commitment. This one's valid and backed by research. We love things more after we call them ours. As Daniel Gilbert wrote in Stumbling on Happiness, quote, consumers evaluate kitchen appliances more positively after they buy them. Job seekers evaluate jobs more positively after they accept them, and high school students evaluate colleges more positively after they get into them. Racetrack gamblers evaluate their horses more positively than when they are leaving the betting window than when they are approaching it, and voters evaluate their candidates more positively when they are exiting the voting booth than when they are entering it. A toaster, a firm, a university, a horse, and a senator are all just fine and dandy, but when they become our toaster, firm, university, horse, and senator, they are instantly finer and dandier, end quote. Which is probably why wedding days are often, quote, the happiest days of our lives, end quote. It's not about having married the one, but having married. And we don't just feel this immediately after a commitment. Rather, we'll keep it up as long as we can. People have a strong need to continue doing what they've previously done. So, sure, I get that. Like, that makes sense.
And to justify their choices retroactively.
Yeah.
Like, I was right. Yeah.
Yeah. Though I will say there's something to be said also, like, if we're going to break out old sayings, it's better to want than to have, so like, I think this can kind of go both ways with what they're saying, but sure, when you think of something as yours, you do take care of it better. You do care about it more.
I think there's something to that idea of buy-in, like when you've bought into something, you're in it. Like, I think my brain works that way a lot. Like, it can take me a while to decide whether I really want to like commit to something or someone, or how I feel about it. But once I decide that I'm in, I'm really in. So I think there's some truth to that. But, again, there are other ways to express commitment than getting married. Like, marriage and commitment are not necessarily, marriage is not the only way to commit to somebody, or to show your commitment, or to show your commitment to yourself.
Sure. MK, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I definitely understand that. I think you see a lot of examples of that. Yeah, when you have something that you think of as your own, you're going to want to protect it more and defend it more too. But you kind of can get into some bad situations with that, because especially when it comes to people, well, the whole idea of like possessing someone is weird to me. Like, yes. I don't want to have any, like, I don't know. It doesn't necessarily bring me comfort to know that like I have someone just to myself. But, like, that's just my own, I guess, preferences with things. But it will make you more likely to, defend those people, for example. And this was kind of a trap. Like, if you fall into a situation that's not healthy, a relationship that's unhealthy, you can stick it out for a lot longer, and you can end up defending even shitty behavior on your partner's behalf because of that phenomenon, and also the kind of sunk cost fallacy too. Like, I've spent so much time on this relationship, and some people don't like being wrong. They dig their heels in, and I definitely did a lot of that in my marriage. I was like, well, he's mine, and that means like his actions reflect on me, so I have to figure out a way to justify some of the crazy shit he's doing, so it doesn't like come off badly on my judgment.
Right.
Yeah, I really can
and
see
that's
that.
not healthy.
Yeah. I'm kind of, for some reason, like a line from Fight Club came to mind, which is where Tyler says, things you own end up owning you. And I don't know where to go with that, but I'm just saying that, like, I get the point that they're making, but I think there's kind of arguments to go all sides on that.
Yeah, like bringing up, like Stephanie's point too, about like finding that balance with like a healthy non-attachment,
Sure.
is so important, because you can support someone and you can use those kinds of terminology like, oh, he's mine, or they're mine, and stuff like that, without it maybe being so extreme, and with also having healthy boundaries and not putting up with excessive bullshit.
Well, I think that it points at something that we bring up often on Relationship Rhombus specifically, which is most people, if you ask them what do they think love is, they don't have a definition. Like they don't have a clear-cut definition. And look, if there's anything that's hard to define, human love, whatever love is. Yeah. I mean, talk about fucking complex. Sure. It is tough to define it, but I think it's good to have at least some kind of little ground rule, or not ground rule, but like some kind of running definition that you can at least quickly, give an elevator pitch of. My favorite is from Robert Heinlein that I quote all the time. Love is when your happiness is intertwined with someone else's. But that's the thing, is that definition is just saying that their happiness is intertwined, not that their life, that their like entire existence, their stuff, their personhood, etc. is intertwined with you. Just their happiness. So guess what? That could take the shape of them being with somebody else, and you being happy with that, and that's still you loving them. And so, I mean, and that's part of the reason that I like the agility of that definition of love, that it makes a lot of sense to me. And so I think that, it's a good place to start. When you're talking about commitment, you better know what the hell you're committing to. And most people don't have an answer for that question in the first place.
Oh, so, yeah. That's always been one of my favorite quotes about love too, because I don't think of love in a possessive kind of sense. And like, not that it's wrong to think of it in that way, or whatever. Right. It's just like my own kind of internal feelings about it. So the way I love people is in a way that's like, whatever is going to be best for them. I want to support them through that. So yeah, that definition definitely makes sense.
Sure. Any thoughts, Stephanie, or you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I like that definition too. It's not quite enough for me. I think there's more to love than just someone's happiness intertwined with your own. But I think it's a good start or a foundation for the definition of love. And yeah, I mean, love is a weird word because people use it to mean so many different things.
It has a lot of degrees.
It has a lot of degrees, yeah. And, we don't, in the English language, we don't have separate words for like friendship love, parent-child love, family love, romantic love, sexual lust, like we don't have really separate words for those kinds of things. And so the definitions end up getting really muddied. And I think that can be kind of a problem because those are really important things to be able to express, is like what kind of love you feel for somebody, but we don't necessarily have the vocabulary to express it readily available to us.
That is such a brilliant point to bring up, because here's an example, okay? And this is maybe why marriage hasn't completely gone the way of the dodo yet. And let me just say this quick, and I'm sure both of you would agree. Feel free to not agree, of course. But like, look, folks, if you want to get married, get married. Like, I don't give a shit, I mean, do your thing.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, like, if we're going to question institutions and all that as people that are into, individualism and whatever else, well, let's go all the way, like, let's question this stuff. But your point is really sound, because so the concept of time travel, right? A good time travel story, H.G. Wells, or an episode of Star Trek or something. In fact, H.G. Wells, his book, The Time Machine, which was kind of one of the first works of fiction around time travel, when it was getting translated, because it's this wild bestseller and it's getting translated to other languages, particularly French, they didn't know what to title it. They had like 50 different titles each time they were printing it, because the concept of time travel, they had no words for it. Like, what the fuck is time travel? No one ever thought of that before 150 years ago. And I mean, for us, it's commonplace. We think of, I don't know, Outlander or whatever the fuck runs through our heads, when we think of time travel. But they had a really hard time. They're like, it's all poorly titled. It just has something to do with a machine or something like that. Like, and it doesn't, you don't get the concept that it's something that goes through time, so this is a real problem, and I think it's still a problem today, is that we don't have the words. We literally do not have the vocabulary to describe some of these aspects of the human condition. I've said this many times, but I mean, really, like you're hitting the point home, is that love alone has so many different definitions, and we don't even have the adjectives. Like, I mean, the English language sucks at adjectives. I think there's 30 positive adjectives within the English language, and there's 600 negative ones, literally. And you've got a problem there. Like, how do you even describe this?
We don't have words for types of love. We don't have enough feeling words, I don't think.
Right.
Like, we don't have enough words for emotions. We also don't have a lot of words for types of relationships, you know? Like, and modern English is inventing new words to describe different types of relationships, but it takes a while for those words to percolate through the culture and for people to start adopting them and using them. And even those, like, sometimes they still don't feel good enough. Like, one of the examples I love to bring up is the terms boyfriend and girlfriend. It's like, those are terrible words. They're not a boy or a girl. They're an adult, and they're not your friend. They're your lover, right? So, or friend.
Lover is such a weird word.
Yeah, that's a weird word. Yeah, and it can be a little bit weird because, you know, if you introduce yourself as somebody's lover, like, they immediately think of you two, like, naked and, like, rolling around on a bearskin rug, you know, like, and that could be a mental image that, you know, your grandparents don't want to get, or you don't want to get of your grandparents.
Right.
Yeah, and sometimes, like, your friendships are more valuable to you than the person you're sleeping with necessarily, and it's always like, you're kind of put on the spot in these situations. Sometimes, say you're in like a somewhat casual relationship with someone that's, you're not using the term partner or boyfriend or girlfriend or anything, but you're not necessarily like best friends either. You really value your friendships, and someone asks you like, oh, are you guys just friends, as if the term friends is somehow this less than, you know, it's seen as less important than being in a relationship.
Right.
And I think it's a backwards way of thinking about it. And like, you know, if someone asks me that, like, it's hard to not respond. It's like, oh no, we're not friends, we're just fucking. Like, I think, you know, there's like different levels of importance when I think of like who my friends are. You know, it's a very meaningful word for me.
Right.
And I don't know that like a casual like sexual relationship with someone would meet those kinds of standards, but we have it. The way most people think of it is reverse. It's like, oh, whoever you're sleeping with, that's got to be the most important relationship in your life. And it's not necessarily always the case.
Friends with benefits is another term that bothers me because so often I see those types of relationships that people call friends with benefits, and the people are not treating each other even with the basic like respect that you would treat a friend with, you know, like they are not actually treating them as a friend. Like they're basically, sometimes they're just kind of using each other for sex, and they're not being very considerate to each other. And it's like, you wouldn't treat your friend that way. So you're not actually friends with benefits. And then if you're friends with someone, isn't that a benefit in and of itself, right? Like, the sex isn't the only benefit, you know, like my friendship is in and of itself a benefit of, you know, like relating with me. It doesn't have to be so yeah, like the terms that we use are so fucked up, and it, like, you know, just having this one word of love that's used to mean so many different things. I really think that those unclarities of terms like really contribute to a lot of misunderstandings and miscommunications, and like just like not having things clearly defined and people not being on the same page.
Sure.
Yeah, and I had a long conversation. I've been having an ongoing conversation with our mutual friend Davi Barker over this topic of love, and he kind of he's broken it down into different categories. I think it's like 6 different categories or so.
He uses like the Greek Roman words, right?
Right. He uses like Greek and Roman terms to describe the different types of love he has for people in his life. Like there's like a brotherly, like family type love. There's, you know, a friendship, you know, just platonic type love. There's like a fiery, passionate type of love that's more of like a lustful kind of love. There's like a I'm trying to think of all the different ones.
There's one where you've been with someone forever, and it's not as like fiery anymore, but it's like a lifelong bond kind of thing.
Yeah, it's like a lifelong kind of bond. There's the love you could have for a higher being, for example, like agape love.
Right.
So, and I did find it useful to kind of break love into those categories. But even those like are limiting too. Language is so I don't know. It's so weird sometimes.
Yeah, language itself can be very limiting. But yeah, I mean, we're not done making new words. I know there's people who want to be done with it, but sorry, phablets are a thing. You know, there's one in your pocket. So anyway, yeah. But yeah, you know, actually this kind of gets into the last point that gets brought up. And it's basically what they're saying here is we all think we value freedom more than commitment, but in fact, the opposite is true. And he bases this on studies. Here's the problem I have with this part of the article. Okay, we think we value freedom more than commitment, but in fact it's the opposite. We value commitment more than freedom. I think that shifts throughout people's lives. You know, there's times where you need someone in your life, and then there's times where you don't. Or at least you feel you don't, or you feel you do need it. You know, I mean that goes both ways. I don't think that that's like a set statement. There's studies that they point at in this, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's the same for everybody and at every point in their life. I completely agree with that. Like,
right.
Whatever you value, you should be able to identify it, though, right? Like, you should be able. I feel like it's a good standard if you're in a relationship. You should be, or if you're not in a relationship, but you're just trying to get to know yourself, you should be able to say, right now in my life, I have a strong need for freedom and I'm not so interested in commitment at this time. Or you should be able to say, like, right now in my life, I am looking for commitment and I'm willing to give up, I guess, a little bit of freedom in order to make that commitment more stable or secure.
Sure. Yeah.
It's more important to me to have the commitment.
Yeah. So I think this is very fluid. I don't think this is like a set statement, and the fluidity of it, you know, debunks the concept of marriage anyway. So, but MK, did you have thoughts?
Yeah, I'm curious how they're defining commitment and what are the studies they're talking about, because generally speaking, I think I can agree with that, like that most people want, you know, some type of value commitment, but like what does that stem from? Again, does it stem from this fear of abandonment? Is it like, are they afraid of the responsibilities that freedom could give them?
Yeah.
You know, or are they afraid, like, do they think that commitment means they have something on lock and it's actually, and they think it's more secure than it actually is? Like, there's a lot of, I don't know, there's a lot of questions I have with like the research and that, and like how they're defining commitment and who they're kind of talking to, because I do think it kind of changes throughout people's lives. And those are such broad terms too. What is freedom and commitment? Why, and you can have both in a relationship.
Sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
You know, like you can find a balance of both. Like, it doesn't have to be a one or the other kind of situation.
I think you're hitting at something interesting too, though, is that the world not only appeals to the average, but the world is largely average. There's a reason average exists. Like I think that for a lot of people, these are things. And part of the problem is that marriage is a legal institution. I mean, that's a major part of the problem. And so it doesn't just affect the average, it affects the below and the above, you know, as far as, you know, people out there. And that's, I see that as a real, I agree. I think most people, no, I don't want to
like,
say
I have
sheep.
to accept that, like, I'm an outlier, so my preferences and what I view as healthy for me do not accurately reflect what is, you know, what the preferences are for most people.
Sure.
You know, like, I've accepted that. Like, I know that I can't, like, expect the conventional world to conform to my weird outlier tastes. You know, I just have to accept that. So...
Yeah, no, I understand that, because I think...
So are you saying that you think in this article, when they say freedom versus commitment, you think they mean that most people would rather be in a committed relationship than have the freedom of being single?
Well, let me read the paragraph that they give off here. It says, in one study, photography students were told they could keep one of their photographs. One group was told that once they chose, they couldn't change their minds. The other group was told that they could swap their choice at any time. Later, both groups were asked how much they liked their photograph. Results showed that the students who could change, or quote-unquote escape, their decision liked their photograph less than the students whose decision was final. We're happier with finality. That's the point that they make.
I mean, yeah, that is an interesting point, and that kind of goes back to some of the other points the article's making too, but it is kind of, I mean, yeah, it's almost like a I don't know if that would be the right term, but it's kind of similar to the sunk cost thing. Like you're going to value something more if your options are limited in the first place, maybe. And that, I don't know that that's a healthy way of thinking, though. You know, that might be the default, but I don't know that that's necessarily the most healthy. Like, is you know, the fact that like you can only have one type of soup in like a communist country that makes it the best soup. You know, you're
Right.
like, you know, like
We love this soup in this country.
we love this soup, and this is the best soup. Like, I mean, because their options are limited. I mean, that's not necessary. I'm not trying to say that like it's a communistic kind of way
But I
of
can
thinking,
believe that this is
but-
how most people think.
Yeah.
You know, and that as to where, because I mean, even that is almost instantaneously, like that's framed within monogamy, because, you know, like
Yeah.
if you could choose other photographs, well, you know, I mean, there's no reason you have to love one less than the next photograph that you decide to switch to or something like that. You know, I mean, like there's
it's hard
a lot.
for me to even get in that mindset.
Yeah, sure.
Honestly, because it's like I don't view like, you know, if I had multiple partners or something, I just couldn't imagine like viewing people in like a hierarchical kind of sense. I guess it's like, oh well, I love this person more than I love this person. Like that's I don't know. That's a weird way of thinking about people. And
Right.
It's like,
yeah, sure.
I don't know.
I don't think poly people who have like those hierarchies necessarily usually mean it that they love one more than the other. I think,
I wasn't trying to imply that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think when poly people talk about like a primary partner, it usually is just a kind of a code for saying we live together,
Yeah, it's a
or
concept
we've
of
been
time
together
spent.
for a longer
Yeah.
time than these other people that I'm also dating or whatever. But you know, getting back to this example, people aren't photographs, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
Right.
I don't think it's a very good study to back that claim because, yeah, like a photograph is an object, like we talked about before. You treat it completely. You don't have a relationship with that photograph.
Right.
You have a relationship with a person. And I don't think it's actually true that when people are forced to commit or make a choice, they like the thing that they chose more or the person that they chose more, because there are so many people who get married and then once they're in this committed, you know, supposedly committed marriage, their eye starts to wander. It starts to stray. They start to look at other people. They start to have affairs,
Right.
you know? And so in that case, obviously they're not like, you know, liking their spouse more because they committed to them or chose them. So I just don't know that we can use that study to like completely prove that point.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the stats bear that out with marriage too.
Yeah.
Like marriage doesn't make people value their spouses more.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
Actually-
It's a crapshoot, really. Like it's, in fact, I think it's leaning more towards the majority of people get divorced now. So like it's
Sure.
kind of, yeah, that point doesn't even really make sense given the statistics we have about marriage and divorce.
Yeah, again, it might just totally chalk up to a false dichotomy of like commitment and freedom, kind of like you were saying,
Yeah,
MK,
right,
that
like
these
it's-
things you don't exactly have to have one or the other. Like you
Right.
could sort of have both. So yeah,
Now, you were talking, MK, about like unhealthy ways of like expressing commitment or like practicing commitment, but I think there could be like totally healthy ways of like expressing commitment. I mean,
yeah.
I just think of like, you know, it kind of, I guess, goes into integrity, right? Like if your actions are consistent with what you're thinking, like if what you do, say, and think are all consistent and on the same page, then if you say that you love your partner and you are with them and you're spending time with them and living with them, and you're, you know, acting like you like them and expressing that to them, I think that is all really positive because it shows integrity as well as commitment. But if like, you know, if you're saying that this person is my partner, but you're not really acting like it, or if you're saying this person is not my partner, but you're acting like they are your partner, you know, those can be a little bit like, okay, something weird is going on here. So I guess commitment to me, like, or a healthy type of commitment is more about like just integrity and communicating to the person how you really feel about them and reassuring them through your actions and words lining up that it's really true.
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, absolutely. So that's in conclusion, they say, if you value social acceptance, especially among family and friends, but also professional and or religious groups, then just get married and do whatever it takes to stay married. But if we value deeper happiness, then,
solid advice there.
Yeah.
If you want your church to accept you, I mean, just get married and stay married.
Right. But if we value deeper happiness, then we have to take a more complex approach. Deeper happiness means we understand that the only thing we control is ourselves, and that everything changes, and sometimes people change, and contracts mean very little to the human spirit at the end of it all. I love that line.
Yes.
Yes, it's so validating to hear that. And folks, I'm just going to put this out there real fast. I think this extends well beyond marriage, but that's just as far as contracts go, but that's just me. So
Brian gets triggered when the C word comes up.
Right.
Contracts.
But we signed a contract.
Yeah. Oh, man.
Especially smart contracts.
Oh, God.
I wish I could wipe my ass with those, but
yeah, the only good thing about a paper contract is you can wipe your ass with
awesome toilet paper.
Right,
it feels really good, especially when there's a little gold lame on it or something. But anyway.
Yeah. But yeah, I love that article. I remember reading it around the time it came out. I was just like, yeah, this really makes a lot of sense. And I mean, it's stuff that I think we've all kind of been aware of for years now and talked about in, various mediums and stuff. And yeah, I mean, really good points. And yeah, again, like if you do value that social acceptance and stuff like that, I think that is most people. They want to go along to get along. And I mean, that's fine, I guess.
Yeah,
I don't understand it, but like, go ahead. Like, if that's what makes you happy, ultimately.
But that's the thing that people.
But does it make you happy?
Right.
And that's the thing.
People think it's going to make them happy, but it doesn't necessarily.
I see so many people in marriages that are clearly not happy. Like, they have everything they think they wanted, and they think that they should be able to check off these little check boxes, and that happiness is like a checklist, and it's just not. You need more from life than that. And people, you can just kind of tell sometimes, and it's like, if you take the time to think about these things more and deconstruct some of the conventional ways of thinking, then you can get to that place of happiness more easily. It takes work, though, and I mean, I don't know, like, I think some people are like, oh, well, going the conventional way, that's kind of the easy way. I mean, I don't really think of it that way. I don't think there's anything easy about just assimilating into a kind of conventional culture, especially if it's at your own personal risk of autonomy.
Sure.
But that's just me. So,
well, I think, that what makes you happy, I would rephrase that as what I consider, what I call the ultimate philosophical question any individual needs to ask themselves is, what do they want? What do you want? And as much as I think a person should at least baseline be able to answer what they think love is, I think you should also be able to answer the question, what do I want? Or at least have an idea. Give us something. Most people can't answer that question either. They have no fucking clue. And that, I mean, honestly, it's all right because I want to empathize with people because society doesn't want you to ask the question, what makes me happy? What do I want? And it's the me and the I that society fucks with you about. You know what I mean? And so I understand that. I understand why people can't answer that question. I'm not insulting them. I'm just saying that, like, you got to be able to answer that question. And I think if people actually could answer that question, antiquated institutions like this wouldn't be a part of the program. Not at the end of the day.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think that we look around in society, especially when we're young and we're trying to figure out what makes us happy and how to live our best life and what we want for ourselves. We look around and we see so many examples of people who are doing what they're supposed to do, what they've gathered through cultural messages that they are supposed to do. And they're following the formula, but they aren't happy, but they're pretending to be happy.
Right.
They're putting out an image of happiness when they aren't actually listening to themselves and what they want. They don't know how to listen and tune into themselves. They only know how to follow the script that they've seen illustrated, but they don't know that the script doesn't necessarily make you happy. And so, you can end up with a really bad case of imposter syndrome because you can follow the script to the letter, and many people do. They learn how to do everything that you're quote unquote supposed to do in life in order to have a happy and successful life, but yet they're miserable. And then they have to reckon with that and figure out what they're going to do about it because, they realize that at some point that the script, just following the script isn't a recipe for happiness. So it's harder to actually tune into yourself and listen to what you want, even if that's against the grain of what you see other people doing. And it's hard to even know that you need to do that when you have no examples of people who you've seen tuning into themselves and doing what they want. Like, the biggest example I think of is like corporate jobs, right? Like everybody knows that, well, most people know if they've actually worked in them, that corporate jobs have an element of soul-crushing, soul-sucking boredom that just makes you feel like life is meaningless, right? And like, but yet we see so many people, and it's valued in society. It's like, oh, get a good job, get a stable job,
right.
get it, which means a corporate job. Yeah, get those benefits, right? As though health insurance and a 401k is going to make you happy, which it doesn't for everybody. So like we hear those conflicting messages, and we don't see a lot of people who have left corporate jobs or chosen not to get corporate jobs, and how are they doing in their life? You know, I think part of it is because those people who have maybe left a corporate job or never pursued one in the first place don't need to prove that they're happy to everyone else. They are happy, you know, internally, and they don't feel the need to get validation from others. Whereas the people who are in those soul-sucking corporate jobs are desperately trying to convince everyone else that they're so happy, you know, and they pull it off sometimes. So it's tricky when you're growing up and trying to figure all this stuff out and about what happiness means to you personally. And it's really tricky to get your frequency tuned to the correct channel, which is like listening to yourself and what you want instead of what everyone else is doing or what everyone else says that you should do. So in relationships, it's the same way. So if any, you know, like there are going to be a lot of people listening to this who are already married, and we've been shitting on marriage for an hour and a half at this point, and they've probably tuned us out. But, you know, if you've never been married, or if you're trying to figure all this out, like listen to what we say and realize that it's one perspective on this that you may not hear very often.
Well, that's why I want it out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very rare.
And you may want to take that into consideration. And even if you are married and you're like listening to what we say and you're like, yeah, they're right. Like this isn't making me happy. Like I don't like this. I should have never done this. You know, it's not too late to get out. You can
get unmarried and stay together.
You can.
Like,
you can get unmarried.
Yeah, sure. So,
and it's not. I don't view it as an easy option. You know, like it's the conventional option, but I think in the long run, it doesn't. Like getting married, getting a corporate job, checking off all of the boxes for what society tells you should be happy. It's not easier, because then you wind up, you know, with a middle-age crisis, and you're like, what have I done with my life? I'm not happy. And then you're even more entrenched in everything, and it's even harder to get out at that point. Like, I think I was really lucky that I got to marry when I was really young and then get divorced when I was really young. Because
sure.
And it's not that I didn't give it a fair shot. I was very committed in my marriage. Like, I tried really hard to make it work. And ultimately, I just had to accept that it was never for me. You know, it was never like I was not the type of person who was supposed to be married. So, and thankfully, I found that out early on. A lot of people don't get that opportunity, you know, and then they feel like they're stuck because more years go by and you get more entrenched in things.
Maybe kids, yeah.
Kids get involved in the picture, and and that's a much harder situation to get out of.
Yeah, there's a song by a band called Queensryche. I'm a big fan. It came out in '94 off their album Promised Land, and it's called One More Time Around. And the whole thing is about this guy. It just rips your heart out. And I remember listening to it even as a teenager. And the whole thing is like, this guy does everything. He invests in gold. He does, gets the corporate job, does the whole shtick, gets married, and everything. And then it's him at the end of his life, and he says, but right now, all I want is one more time around is all I ask for now. Because he didn't actually do what made him happy, and because he just followed the script. And I just remember hearing that and just going, oh, fuck. Like the song, music, as uniquely music can make you feel. Like, it had me almost in tears as a teenager. I'm like, yeah, I'm not falling for that. I still did it for a little while. I fell for it, but, fortunately you can keep reconnecting with your past self and checking in, and maybe there's things you always knew. I think all three of us kind of always knew that. I don't know. I knew at a very young age. I remember explicitly saying to somebody, like as a really young kid, saying, yeah, I could see myself getting married, but I don't want kids. You know?
Same here. And I'm finding it very useful to reconnect with that rebellious teenage part of me that knew I was right. I was right as an angsty, rebellious teenager who wanted to burn the whole thing down. Like, I got assimilated.
Yeah.
Kate was right.
Smarter than we give ourselves, or as teenagers, are smarter than we give ourselves credit for it.
Yeah, and now, like, I'm revisiting a lot of those things in a more mature way and now with more experience.
Right.
But, like, I can look back and be like, no, my instincts were right, you know, when I was that age, to not get married and not fall into a conventional lifestyle.
Damn right.
And I gave it a shot, and I was right, and it wasn't going to work for me, and it will never work for me.
Hell yeah. So we've been going a while, and I think we should probably cut it.
Yeah.
There is another subject I'd love to get into, but if we don't have time to do it like tomorrow, I mean, we'll just cut
What's
it
the
here.
subject?
The triad subject.
Oh my God. Yeah, I do want to talk about that.
I want to know about that.
Okay, we can go till 6:30.
Well, I think it might take more than 20 minutes. But
Okay. Well, let's just talk about it. Let's do it now while we're here.
okay. All right, we're
good.
here.
I'm
So,
good.
all right, we're going to go till 6:30.
Yeah.
This is what we're doing. All right, executive decision. Okay. Live to tape. Here we go. So, okay, let me just pull up something fast here. So, yes, on the recent episode that we just did, episode 275
Of Sovryn Tech
of
Prime.
Sovryn Tech, during where we were reading one of the listener questions, which, by the way, we did find out that the pickle that in the fantasy that was described was actually a real edible pickle.
Pickle dick!
Yes, I love that. She was wondering if the fermentation would be an issue, and I can answer that question. No, if it's a if it's a lacto-fermented pickle, because lactobacilli are the same beneficial bacteria in yogurt that are generally considered a great vaginal probiotic.
Ah, fantastic.
thinking
So it's
that
almost
too.
healthy.
Yeah.
Wow, wonderful. So, because I asked that question too. It was like the first thing I wondered about. So, anyway, so that talking about that led to me mentioning how a lot of people actually contact us, Stephanie and I, about, hey, you know, would you like to be a triad relationship? I'd like to be a part of this, blah, blah, blah. Now, I actually pulled some of them up. Some of them I think are very heartfelt, and I think they were meant to be private.
Okay.
And so I don't want to even on Patreon.
Because, folks, this is the first I'm hearing of this. Like,
well, I mean, the thing is, like, I picked out one of the ones that I was just like, okay, whatever, you know, but I don't want somebody to feel embarrassed that I'm like reading their, you know, what might have been very heartfelt for them,
Okay.
you know, on the air.
Sure.
Like, I mean, I want to be respectful of that.
well, but my first question before you read any of these, like you said, you mentioned this in like you breezily mentioned
Yeah.
it on the show yesterday, and I was like, wait a minute, what? And I was wondering if they were actually asking us to be a triad, which is, as I understand that term, it is a term for a polyamorous relationship between three people.
Right.
That is a loving, committed relationship. And I was wondering if they were asking for a triad or if they were asking for threesomes, which a threesome is different. A threesome is just sex between three people.
Now, most of the time it's specifically it's using the term triad. Now, people may not know
Right,
the
yeah,
difference.
that's
okay.
right, yeah.
You know, which
That'd be
I'm,
good to-
which
good
I'm
to
certainly open
distinguish.
to. But like, here's an example. This is a very short one that was on Sarah Ha. Just saying, if you and the goddess ever needed a slave, you just say so on the show and I'll be in touch.
Wow.
So something like that, right? Like that's kind, and a lot of them play off.
I
of a
mean, we
similar
do
thing.
need a slave, but it depends on who you are.
Right. So anyway, yeah. So like we get stuff like that, you know, that come in, and some of these, you know, I don't tell you every hate mail that I get, even though a lot of them are just positively ridiculous, and you know, yeah, right. He's making the jerk off motion.
Yeah. Wank, wank. Yeah.
So, but anyway, some people were, you know, kind of like asking about this. Well, what are these, you know, triad things? What's the deal with this? Blah, 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 blah. Are you just like not open to this sort of thing? Whatever. And, you know, I was saying to you this morning, Stephanie, that like, I'm coming to the conclusion, and folks, if the conversation we just had about marriage and all this other stuff, okay, if the conversation we just had didn't express enough that the concept of love is a very dynamic thing, very complex thing, okay, and that the human condition itself is very dynamic and complex. Like, it's not one size fits all, Okay. Everybody has different tolerances. Everybody has different desires. Everybody has different things that they want in their life, blah, 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 and what they can handle and what they have time for, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So let's be very clear on that. But I'm going to phrase it in this way. Like I was saying to you this morning, Stephanie, like in my opinion, it's like I think it's the optimal human relationship, like human form of relationships.
A triad.
Is a triad. One guy, two women, and then you. That's all I said. That's all I said. But I want people to understand this. I just said that, and then Stephanie goes and just runs like with this, and she starts talking. Well, I think this, not debunking me or whatever, and. Go ahead.
Just adding thoughts. You want me to run with it like I did this morning?
Yeah, I'll stand by my statement that I think that that's true, and I may think it's true across the board, but everybody has different.
It's the most stable structure.
Well, there's
that's
pyramids.
Right.
I mean,
yeah,
pyramids.
Yeah. Hey, so we'll watch Ancient Aliens later.
Oh, good. We're gonna watch Ancient Aliens.
Well,
I
don't know if we're gonna do that, but anyway, no. Actually, I think we had something else we were gonna watch, but we'll do that. But anyway, Stephanie.
Okay, so you say that you think a triad between one man and two women is the most optimal human relationship.
Yes.
Okay, so the first thing I said was that I think that maybe you're right that it is the best kind of relationship for you, and I like it too. I really like that relationship structure. I think it's awesome. Uh-huh. I don't know that that's the best type of relationship for everybody necessarily. Like, I don't know that you can make a blanket statement like there is an optimal type of relationship for everybody.
Right, which is what I was saying, that like we all agree here that
I think
human life is dynamic.
Different types of relationships fit different people better at different times in their life and so forth. But having said that, historically, the whole triad between two women and one man has been a thing. It's been a type of relationship that's come up over and over again in history, even during historical times when it was very taboo and very not kosher to do that. Love persisted in those situations. And I think that's really amazing, though, to hear those stories of just what people went against in order to have triad relationships like that. I think it's really touching. And it shows that, that is like a cool type of relationship that is totally valid and is worth exploring and thinking about. And you said something, Brian, like, this has something to do with the fact that most women are bisexual. And, I
think all women are, but that's me. That's my opinion.
I agree with that. And I also think that I don't really know about men. Like if women as a group are more bisexually inclined than men are, I think maybe more men are bisexual than admitted in this culture and this moment in time. However, I think there might be also something to the fact that female sexuality is like a little bit more fluid or a little bit more open to homosexual relationships than men are. And then, then there's the whole thing about like male kind of competitiveness. And I hate to do this because it sounds like I'm gender stereotyping or something like that. But I do think, bottom line, that there is something that works about the whole like two bisexual women and a man. I think there's something that's really appealing about that combination. Mm-hmm. And it's borne out by history. Now, then we started talking about this idea. I don't know, MK, have you ever heard of this study that showed they were analyzing DNA from kind of like Neanderthal or Neolithic humans that showed that basically only 1 out of every 17 men reproduced. And the other 16 did not get to pass on their genes. And so
I think I have heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's, if you look at like, for example, Genghis Khan and how like,
say Genghis Khan, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he's an extreme example of that, of how, how many men in the world currently carry like fragments of his original X chromosome. It's pretty amazing how reproductively successful certain men in history were and how unsuccessful a lot of other men were. And, I think that's very interesting because the thing is, when you start talking about relationships where there's one man and multiple women, I think the reaction of a lot of males is, hey, that's unfair, because if we start doing multiple women with one man, then all the best men are going to get all the women and the other men are going to get no women. And I think
this is where I started going,
yeah. And yeah.
What about my pee-pee?
Exactly. And we have an article that we're saving for Sex and Science Hour where we're going to talk about this as well, where there's been a massive population shift because of misogyny and devaluation of women and girls in India and China, and because families wanting to have a son. There's a massive population shift in India and China where there are 40 million fewer women than there are men in those countries, and a lot of the men are getting extremely angsty and complaining about not being able to find a woman to marry because there aren't as many.
Rates are going up too.
Yeah, their lives are being described as stagnating. They are living at home with their mothers and grandmothers and having their mothers and grandmothers take care of them, or they are having to learn how to cook and clean for themselves, and they're having the biggest existential crisis about it and whining about it. There was a spotlight on one man in this article who lived in a room that was littered with cigarette butts all over the floor with 5 other men in bunk bed style dorms, and he's like, well, I can't get a woman because the women only want men with money and I can't get money, and he's just
had no interest in bettering himself whatsoever.
Yeah, right.
He was just like, they should just accept me for how I am. And it's like,
he felt entitled to a wife when he didn't do anything to try to improve himself to voluntarily attract a wife. Right. Mm-hmm. And that's really the thing for me is I think that, triad relationships like we described, and polygamy is a good thing because it gives men an incentive to better themselves, not to beat other men. Like, I know that a lot of men throughout history did try to become dominant through force, and I don't support that.
Sure, Genghis Khan.
But I do, yeah, exactly. But I do support, people having incentives to better themselves in order to attract partners. Sex is such a powerful incentive for self-improvement. And when it's harnessed for that, I think that's a really good thing. And so, yeah, I mean, that's who you hear promote, like men. I'll just say it, inferior men or beta males have historically promoted monogamous marriage because it is a type of relationship that benefits them, because if each man can only have one woman, then that means there are more women available for men like them who couldn't necessarily get to the top of like sort of a hierarchy and attract more than, a bunch of women.
Yeah, so this is where Stephanie went when I made that very simple statement. Suddenly, here we go, Dr. Stephanie Murphy, with with a bunch of studies in science. And,
right. I mean, it's the alpha males who get all the babes, and then the babes can get each other too. So.
Well, I think of it as a very stable thing. I mean, it's something that I've thought a lot about. I mean, I would definitely like to be in a triad relationship if I could find like another like stable. The idea of like joining an already stable couple is really appealing to me. And also as like a bisexual woman, like I think
you got the best of both worlds.
Make sense.
Yeah.
And so and also just from a the way the economy is changing, for example, like living in cities is really difficult, and I want to live in a city, and like if you're able to pool your resources together with multiple people, that makes it a lot easier.
That's a great point. I hadn't even thought of that. Yeah,
like being able to live together, you have like 3 incomes or something like that, that could provide a lot more stability than trying to go it alone, or even just as a couple, and I don't know, I would definitely like to see more social acceptance of that. And I do get some of, like, I can also kind of see some of the argument of or at least some of why people think it might be somewhat like exploitative of women. Like I have heard some criticism of like, a man is, he has 2 women, and like that's like a weird power thing.
But if the women are allowed to be with each other too, if they have a relationship with each other, I think that power dynamic really equalizes a lot.
Exactly. It's because it's not polygamy. Mm-hmm. I think there are some weird power issues with polygamous arrangements.
Yeah, I agree.
That are slightly problematic, but a triad seems a lot more stable. Everyone has the same amount of agency. in the situation.
Well, a guy today should know the power is totally in the hands of the women.
As it should be.
Right. I mean, in that situation.
Or like stable triads between women. I think that's also a
three
really
women.
Yeah, I can see that.
combination.
I like that too.
No, I could totally see that. I mean, and because this is the thing for, if guys are to be a part of the picture,
That is a big if.
Yeah.
Yeah. If they must.
Yeah. I just, and part of what started me down this path of thinking this way was, look, I've been in the situations. I know, I've seen it, that women can do things to other women that guys just will never, ever be able to do. And I'm a very smart guy. And I see it and I go, I can't do that. Like I can't even express that. It's like, oh, sure, I can mimic the moves, but it's not just the moves. There's a passion, knowledge, and like a really something inherent.
It's a shared understanding.
It's ineffable.
Of having lived as a woman, and
Yes.
the ways that you get treated, the body parts that you have if you're both cisgender women, but even if you're not, it's like the ways that you it's the way that you look at the world and the way that the world looks at you, and you have a shared understanding about that without even having to talk about it.
So in conclusion, in my mind, a man absolutely cannot completely please a woman. Like there has to be.
I agree. I think
for the full
most men
picture,
are
another woman's got to be there.
Yeah, a man can never completely please a woman, and because there isn't that shared understanding. And also, like, most men are so far from even being close to pleasing a woman that
Well, right.
so as to be as to disqualify themselves from being adequate partners for any women. So I agree. I mean, Brian, you are an exceptional man, and
No, sorry.
you are an exceptional man, and like I say this all the time, if we weren't together, I wouldn't be looking for another man.
Ooh.
I would be looking for a woman. And I don't consider you, and you don't consider yourself not a man. You do consider yourself a man, but you are different in a lot of ways than other men. And I think that exceptional men should be the ones who get women, not shitty, mediocre men. I think shitty, mediocre men should not get women. Give them an incentive to get better. Yeah. But monogamy acts that way as communism, because then even like the shitty, mediocre men, they don't have to improve themselves. They have more partners available to them by virtue of like everyone accepts monogamy.
Well, and if you play off of the idea like, oh, well, like a single woman is like inadequate without a man, she should just, I've heard this so much times, she should just settle for this guy. She should just settle, settle for the nice guy who's like hanging around and stuff, even if there's not a lot of chemistry or whatever. And it's like, we don't have to settle for anything.
No.
The future is female. I know that's going to piss a lot of people off, but like, no, we don't have to settle for anything. And I've heard, so this is kind of an interesting MRA talking point that I agree with. But for reasons different than they probably think. The whole like men, or the whole idea that women hold the kind of keys to like the sexual,
women are the gatekeepers of sex.
Gatekeepers of sex. Hell yeah, they should be. Sorry, like everyone should have better standards, especially for men, because men are already, it's seen as enough that they just are, and whereas women are usually tasked with having to do all of the self-improvement, and like you're not just enough being as you are, you have to be an exceptional woman.
Yeah.
And I know, and
there's so many no-win scenarios
too. Like
for
women are, graduating with more college degrees than men. Like women as a gender in this country, I don't want to completely collectivize, but they have improved themselves to such heights and men have not caught up with that. And so, yeah, we're not getting married because the men, regardless of what you think about marriage, when marriage rates have completely dropped off for the millennial generation because men aren't good enough. They're not pulling their own weight the same way women are. Women are starting to out earn men. They're more educated than men. And it's like, yeah, why would a woman who's smarter than most of her male colleagues settle for anything and can make more money than him? There are no incentives
the only
to
reason,
stay married or
literally
get married.
The only reason is because you think you should, because it's like what's been done before in the past.
Because you're told you're valueless without a husband, despite having a college degree, a good job, all of these things that are markers of success for a man. As a woman, your value is still attached to whatever male,
Yeah, Dr. Murphy of Dartmouth,
Right. Yeah. Like, I don't need a man.
No, you don't.
But I want love. I mean, I still yes,
Yeah.
I have success and I have a great business that's thriving. I make my own money. I can buy whatever I want. I have professional success and I have a very happy personal life, even independent of my relationships. But yeah, of course I want love. Like, doesn't everybody want love in some ways, right? And so why shouldn't I get it, right?
Right on.
And I do think a triad is a really cool way that would satisfy a lot of my needs. And I think if it were like a loving, stable situation, that would be like an ideal thing.
Sure.
Yeah, I definitely see the appeal of it too, and I always have. And I had to rethink a lot of relationship structures after I got divorced. Like, what is even going to work? And I'm still figuring that out. I still don't know, but the idea of like being a part of a triad has always strongly appealed to me for those reasons.
Yeah, part of my pathway on it. Well, someone made the comment, like actually, so we were mentioning somebody or I mentioned this in previous episodes. Somebody sent me. What do you call that artwork? The bead artwork that we got from...
Oh, pearl beads?
Yeah.
Perler beads?
Yeah, so they sent them of my video game characters from my first video game that I made, Hypercronius. And yeah, it's a triad. It's, it's a guy and two gals. Mm. And somebody said to me, it's like, this seems to be a theme in like everything that you do. And I'm like, well... I guess it is,
Well, because how many other characters do you know in video games or literature or anywhere else where those kinds of relationships are depicted?
Practically
there aren't that
non-existent.
many.
So it's my differentiator, but also, sure, it's like, this is what I think kind of works. But also what led me to that was historically, and I mean even ancient history, this isn't like everything comes in threes. It's not that kind of bullshit. But there are like remarkable moments come with a set of three figures within it. And I don't want to go into the entire history of that. There's too much of it, but that's always been something that's, really been in the back of my mind for a very long time. And so, yeah, that's kind of got me down that path, but I was just in awe. And like suddenly you just started rattling off all this stuff and I was like, oh, wow. And then you started getting into elitism and everything. And of course I was getting all excited. What am I going to do, But also I don't have the words to respond to how sweet it was, what you said about me. Thank you. Like I don't, that really means the world to me. So, if you two want to like talk for just a minute.
Well, I think the triad thing is good, even to think of as like outside heteronormative culture. I think it can be very beneficial for queer people. Yeah, for example,
absolutely.
And I think you see more queer people practicing forms of polyamory than you do non-queer people or straight identified people. There aren't as many hang-ups about your sexuality. Like if you because growing up as like queer people, we knew we were different and we felt that we were wrong and we felt that we were like doing something wrong or that just the way we were maybe wrong in some way.
But since you already don't fit in, there's less cost to questioning social norms because you already don't fit in anyway. So it's like, why not? Why not one more?
Yes, and it can be a really stabilizing force, especially if you've come out of situations that were very unstable, which a lot of queer people experience. Whether queer in terms of sexuality or in terms of their gender identity. Yeah. So, I mean, it can be really stable to have that, have those loving relationships. And, I think it could be a really beautiful thing. And I think we're going to see more of that too, because queer people lead the charge on questioning conventions. Mm-hmm. They always have throughout history. They've been at the forefront of all these battles for civil rights and like questioning things. And I think you're going to continue seeing that push, and it bleeds out into the mainstream culture too. Yeah. So it's something that can work for people regardless of their sexual orientations too. So
I will say, anybody listening to this, if you agree at all, or if you'd at least like to see it become more of a thing, I think, in my opinion, entertainment, fiction, and all that is really where a lot of, I think that's one of the major cultural changing forces, like that really changes culture. I could even go back. I know, MK, you're a fan of this, Sailor Moon. You could go back to Sailor Uranus. I mean, she's been making, young gals and women question their sexuality since the 90s, quite frankly.
All the Sailor Moons.
Well, right.
All of
Yeah.
them.
Every Sailor Scout, right.
I knew that was growing up watching Sailor Moon. I was like, I'm very different from the other kids my age.
Right.
I was like, I want to hang out with all the Sailor Moon girls. Tuxedo Mask, he can do whatever. Did nothing for me. But I was like, oh my God, Sailor Jupiter and Sailor Mars and like Sailor Mercury. Like,
so, right, exactly. Yeah.
So sweet.
So, and yeah, right on. So and that was definitely inspirational for me too. And maybe that's why, like you have Agent Sovryn as almost this Tuxedo Mask character, quite frankly. Anyway, that's getting in a whole other area.
that's a lot of guys' fantasy.
Yeah, I think so. It's not just me. But anyway, regardless. So, create people listening to this. If you want, create entertainment that has these kinds of relationships in it. And I think that, if you get a groundswell, big enough groundswell of it, things can change because it becomes people get that kind of unconscious permission to engage in it. And also, it helps it get normalized and accepted.
Yeah, I mean, coming out is another way to normalize it, but it's not always safe for everybody to come out, so I wouldn't ask people to do that. But if you are comfortable coming out, and you want to like help contribute to the cause of, sharing this, inspiring other people that it's okay to have this type of relationship that you have, go for it.
Well, I mean, just think of how much, as shitty as the book is, how much did 50 Shades do for the idea of power exchange?
Oh my God,
this. No, I mean, really, I was listening to that book by Aubrey Marcus, the guy that started on it. Mm-hmm. He just had a book come out. It's called Own the Day, Own Your Life. It's terrible. Don't read it. But the interesting thing is when he's talking about how to improve your sex life, he had a very open conversation about power exchange, about BDSM.
Huh.
It was, no, this is totally fine. Go ahead and experiment and explore it. And he brought up 50 Shades and all that. And I was just impressed to hear a super mainstream fucking book. And he's getting on, I'm sure he's going to be on Oprah and all this other crap. And he's just, laying that out.
And hopefully that led to people experiencing those things in a more safe environment too. I mean, I know the book is not the greatest thing to read, regarding that topic. And there's a lot of bad advice and stuff, at least that I've heard surrounding that. But maybe it did give people permission to explore that. And then hopefully they were able to find safe venues to do that in. So exactly. I think that's great because I think there are many benefits to, BDSM, even from a therapeutic standpoint. So
sure. I mean, but it proves the point that entertainment, like 50 Shades, can bring this into nonfiction, like a self-help book, by Aubrey Marcus. I mean, it really can. So that's a powerful venue to get these ideas out through. But anyway, anybody have anything else they want to get out there?
I have a question for you, Brian.
Oh, shit.
What do you think about the relationship structure of the quad? And for example, I'm thinking two heterosexual couples that come together and perhaps there's a...
No,
really? Because
No,
I've always thought of that as something else that appealed to me as a stable kind of thing that would...
Wait, would everyone be bisexual in this situation?
The women, but not the men. The men would just be...
Yeah, definitely not.
Just be friends.
My experience, or if you want to go.
I mean, I don't know. I would really, I guess, just my personal preference, I would like to see more bisexual men.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Just in general. I mean, they seem to be even more like unicorn, than the already stereotypical bisexual female unicorn, a male bisexual. And that kind of, let's see, I'm trying to figure out how to word this. Yeah, the quad situation, it just seems, again, it's very much based on the kind of heterosexuality things. Why I don't know. I would be cool with being part of that structure if the men were bisexual too. I think male bisexuality is a very beautiful thing, and male on male love is very beautiful.
Sure.
And I think that they're especially forced to pick a side. I mean, bisexual women are to a degree, but I think bisexual men face even more judgment and discrimination.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and I do think bi men have that's one of the most challenging sexual orientations, I think, and gender combinations is like they have so much shit to deal with, and they are forced to pick a side. I guess I mean, I think it is interesting, a quad where everyone is with everyone else. You know, I think that's great. And any type of polyamorous arrangement where everyone is with everyone else, I think is a good setup because it's very equal. You know, it feels like a very equal foundation and there's not those power imbalances. I just think that it is probably more like societally common, you know, to have like two established heterosexual couples that come together because the women are attracted to each other and the guys are just like, high five, bro. You know, I think that's like a more common thing that you would find out in the wild. But having said, I mean, it would be cool if the guys were getting it on too, right? And everybody liked to watch.
I think it'd probably be more common just because there are just more heterosexual people.
Yeah. For whatever reason too, are there fewer men that identify as bisexual? This is something I think about sometimes. Are there fewer men that identify as bisexual because there are fewer bisexual men than there are bisexual women? Or are there fewer because it's just so much more taboo for people who are raised as men to even think about that, and they just never open their minds to the possibility, you know?
Right. I wonder about that a lot.
I'll tell you. So in my opinion, my anecdote, you know, I'll quote here that this way I don't have to say it. I'll quote Gene Simmons: "Men are jerks."
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you know, like a guy, just like I was explaining how, well, you know, women can give something to another woman that a guy I don't think ever can. Guys know themselves pretty well too. And there's a reason they might not want to be together.
Because they don't trust other men because they know how shitty they can be.
Because I know what they're going after.
Yeah.
I know what they're about. I know how the average guy has sex, why they have sex, what they're about with sex. No thanks. You know, like that's not that I'm, and that's why I say no, at least for me personally. Right. Because I feel like I know a lot of other dudes, and I'm sure they're out there that are wonderful, that are great, that are top notch and know what love is and blah, blah, blah. But they are so few and far between. I mean, you're right. They're the unicorn. You know, they're a serious unicorn, no doubt about that.
And I've had friends too who would describe themselves, men who would describe themselves as bi-curious, or, you know, maybe could be bisexual, but they don't trust other men.
Yeah, right.
They're like, the amount of work I would have to do to like find a decent man.
This is like the old joke about homophobia, right? The reason why, you know, guys are scared of gays is because they're afraid another guy's going to treat them like they treat women. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think there's a ton of truth to that.
Sure.
Yeah.
You know, so I don't, and guys, the other thing too is that most of the guys I've encountered are they talk about attachment. They have attachment problems. They get attached hard, and they get, and well, again, the competitiveness comes up. Now, I'm not saying that that's necessarily nature. That could be nurture.
Sure.
I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
And maybe we never will, but that's there. And I've seen it way too often to where, that I think that sort of thing can work. And that's why I stick more to triad. I mean, if it was like one guy, 3 women, I could see that working, you know, I mean, but I don't know, 2 guys, 2 gals. I don't know. Unless they're all bi, like MK said, I could see that working. Sure.
Yeah, and like MK was saying before, like getting outside of the gender binary and things like that. I think that you know, I agree with you there. It's just and you do find a lot of queer people who are into polyamory. And maybe I'm just describing it in kind of limited terms because that's where my personal attractions tend to fall, is like I tend to like be more into like extremes of masculinity and femininity, but you know, like queer and non-binary, that's totally valid. And also I can think of more examples from history where they would be described in terms of like, okay, this is a man and this is a woman, because ideas of non-binary gender and queerness weren't really fleshed out at those times in history. Yeah. And so it was just like, okay, well, this is man and woman, you know. So but yeah, having said that, like totally other combinations interesting too.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. Yeah, once you get out of the gender binary, I mean, there's all kinds of wild possibilities. But the number 3 might have something special to it still.
Yeah.
Within all of that. So,
yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
Do you think 4 is not as stable as 3?
Well,
do you think they tend to split off into 2 and 2?
This is weird, because so with children, okay,
yeah,
that are like in a family,
yeah, the worst
4
number to
is
have
better
is
than
4.
3 because because 3, 2 will gang up on 1.
Yeah,
that seems to happen almost universally.
I think that happens in triads too, where 2 gang up on 1.
Yeah, but when you're an adult, those you have reasoning faculties that kids maybe just haven't developed yet, and I don't know that it has to work out that way. So because I would say, like as far as just a general social structure, 4 could sometimes in some circumstances are better, but I don't know. Yeah, like I say this often, all things fail at scale. Once you start getting the more numbers you add, the quicker things start to fall apart.
Oh yeah,
I was about to say, you got to have a lot of free time to maybe not free time, but your time is very limited, and the more partners you kind of add on, the more limited time you have for your other partners and for the rest of your life.
Absolutely.
Working and whatever hobbies you might have. That's one. I mean, even though I identify as some version of polyamory, I just can't imagine having a ton of partners, you know, there's too much other stuff I want to do on my own, and I need a lot of free time too. I need a lot of alone time.
Sure.
So I couldn't imagine having a Google Calendar filled, having several 4 or 5 partners at a time. That just sounds really overwhelming to me. Yeah. Now other people can manage it just fine. I'm sure some people are much better with their time management skills. I am not one of those people. So
no, I totally agree with you. I would never want to have more than 2 partners. I mean,
two seems stable. Yeah, too.
Yeah, definitely.
And it can meet all the needs that we were describing, I think. So anyway, anything else?
No, thanks for your thoughts, guys. Thanks for exploring this.
Yeah, MK, thank you for being on with us. You're great. This is awesome.
Did I say everything that I said this morning?
Yeah, you got it all out there. You got it all out there. And,
okay.
We're far too kind to me, but as far as all that goes, but thank you. So anyway, all right, there's the Relationship Rhombus. This is probably one of the longest ones in history. We went almost 2 hours, 20 minutes.
Cool.
Wow.
Yeah, we've been podcasting, but when you got pros like these 3 here, I mean, hey.
MK said she's always DTP, down to podcast.
I am, yeah.
Right on. I love it.
I'm always DTP.
So when this gets released, there will still be one more episode to come out on Patreon for Sovryn Tech. That'll be the Star Wars update that I do with my dear friend. Talk about one of those great guys out there, Robin Freebeard, and we'll have that out to you tomorrow night.
I love him too.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. He's just the best. So anyway, that's it for this one. I will see all of you on the other side.
Woo!